Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. While we are having everybody get connected to audio and video, I want to make sure that if you are in need of the interpreters, that you are able to see them right now. So I will pause for a moment while you're able to set up your screen. Okay. We will go ahead and get started with our slides this morning. Lori, are you able to bring up our slide deck?
Yes. Can folks do that?
Thank you. So this is a big moment. We are getting ready to start our transition into the operational performance assessment for our ed specialists in early childhood special education, visual impairments, and deaf and hard of hearing. And this is our transition webinar to begin that discussion for the math and literacy cycles for 2025-2026. Of course, some of this information is pending the official adoption of some of these assessments at the June commission meeting. So remember that this information is considered in draft form up until those official adoptions. The VI and ECSE math cycles were adopted at the April commission meeting, and then the DHH math cycle and all of the literacy cycles are being proposed for official adoption at the June commission meeting. And with that, we'll go ahead and go to our next slide and we can do our introductions. I believe I've had the opportunity to meet most of you at our other webinars, whether it be for the field test or operational versions or some of our other interactions. But I'm Heather Kennedy. I'm one of our consultants in performance assessment, and I work with our ed specialist operational performance assessments for mild, moderate, and extensive support needs. I've also been doing a lot of the work in the development of these low incidence areas for special education, as well as the development of all of the literacy cycles across all of the credential areas for that pilot and field test. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Marissa.
Good morning. My name is Marissa Luna Lopez. I'm a consultant here with the Performance Assessment Development Team and supporting both CalTPA and CalAPA. And turn it over to Julie.
This is Julie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Holmes. I'm another one of the consultants with the Performance Assessment Team, and I'm supporting the operational version of the CalTPA, as well as the field test for the PK3 math cycle. It's great to be here today. Thank you for joining us.
I believe that Juliet is here as well. Did you want to introduce yourself, Juliet?
I am here. Sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name is Juliet Wallleitner, and I am currently a special consultant in the Office of Policy and Continuous Improvement and supporting our performance assessment team. So I'm here listening in and excited to learn alongside you all today.
Thank you. And we are joined by some of our colleagues from Evaluation Systems. They are our technical contractor. Lori and Xavier, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. This is Xavier. Good morning, everyone. My name is Xavier Webb. I'm a Senior Area Director with Pearson and work with the CTC team to support the development of the performance assessments and ongoing implementation of those that are already in the field. So just look forward to working with you and seeing a lot of familiar faces. So good to see those of you again, as well as hello to everybody else that I have not met. Also joined my colleague, Lori Thornley.
Thanks, Xavier. Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Thornley. I'm a program manager with Evaluation Systems. Happy to be here today.
All right. Well, again, thank you for being here today. It is a big transition here, and we are hoping that this recording will be available to folks who are not here today. We do recognize that June is often a very busy time in school life, and so thank you for coming today. We'll be talking about the field test updates, the draft math cycle overview, draft literacy cycle overview. We'll be talking about the TPE Matrix, some implementation ideas, and items that are on the horizon. Take a look at the next slide. This is a Google Drive that we have prepared with some resources for you. And we're going to go ahead and put that in the chat so you can be able to access it. This is there includes the math cycle backwards planning document. So that's something that's been very helpful to programs as they are looking at the end game of submission of a performance assessment to, where do we start? So it helps candidates and faculty and mentors and everyone that's coming around a candidate to support them through the performance assessment understand some hard deadlines to make sure that we're moving forward. In addition to that math cycle backwards planning document, there is a backwards planning document for the literacy performance assessment as well. Slightly different because of the nature of the assessment and what the candidates have to complete. There is a list of acceptable supports, so what we can do to support candidates in getting through the work of teaching and the teacher performance assessment. Some ideas for embedding the performance assessment into program, how teacher candidates can use video to improve practice, and a copy of this presentation, I believe, will be it's either in there now or it will be after this presentation. So that way folks can share. And it is rather lengthy because these are very different, very specific credentials that folks are seeking. And so we will be breaking out into rooms and talking about some very specific components of this performance assessment. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So some meeting norms. This is an online meeting. We are in a smaller group, but if you do have a question or a comment, you're able, please unmute yourself or add it to the chat. Otherwise, if you could remain muted so we can avoid any background interruptions. We want to keep questions to a general focus. Anything specific to your program or a candidate can be emailed into us, and we happily will address it that way. This is a challenge always to avoid multitasking during the webinar. I know there's a lot of things happening right now. Today's the last day of school for one of my sons. My other son's off to football practice and got 4 calls in a row from the same junk call. But there's a lot of things going on, but if we can stay focused, we can hear everything that's presented. We want to honor time for our presenters and for those moderating any questions or comments. And you can set your view to speaker view or set it up however makes you feel comfortable to be able to get the information today that we'll be sharing. So here we are, CalTPA Education Specialist, Early Childhood Special Education, Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and VI Field Test. And for this, I'll be turning over to Julie to talk about what's been happening.
This is Julie. So we want to give you a little overview of the field test before we launch into showing you more about the math cycle and the literacy cycle. So in the fall, we began our math cycle field test, and we're so grateful to the programs that were able to participate. You will notice that we had 4 ECSE programs from various pathways. And you will see on that far right column the number of candidates that participated in the math cycle field test. Towards the middle of the page, you will see that we had 1 DHH program participate with 6 candidates, and at the bottom we had 2 VI programs participate. In total, we had 48 candidates that participated in the math cycle, and we're so grateful again, and that gave us some great data, and that led to revisions, and that work we will be sharing out with you today. And Marissa will share the timeline.
Okay, so this work has been in the works for quite a while, but we can go back to October 10th, 2024, when we started the field test timeline. That was our big launch, and working through December 2nd to close. Then we were scoring these performance assessments, and in the fall, we scored December 9th through the 11th, so it was a busy December. And then taking a look at some of those items in January and through 13th through the 17th as well. The fall MPA field test scoring for early childhood and VI. January 16th, we continued with PK3. Results were reported to candidates. And it's all happening like very incrementally, but it was very fast, right? And ECE and VI candidates also received their results on February 13th. Then in March, we scored some more DHH submissions. This DHH submission deadline, and surveys went out April 1st. Focus groups happened, where we talked to both candidates and coordinators, and field test results were presented to the commission. And that was the April meeting that Julie was just referring to, where some parts of this were already approved. And the big meeting coming up in June is where a lot more of this will be approved. So that's why a lot of this is still tentative pending approval. April 13th, our spring performance assessment for PK3 deadline came, and we did some scoring again in April. May 20th through the 21st, we had a math performance assessment DHH scoring session where we brought folks together to consensus score. And the DHH and PK3 results were reported to candidates and programs, pass, no pass, on May 29th. And our June commission meeting is the 26th and the 27th. And if you are interested, you can zoom in and participate, and we will also have the items prepared and posted on the website, typically 1 to 2 weeks before the meeting, so you can make any kind of public comment that you have. So that was our timeline. So very busy, and all at the same time, the literacy performance assessment, and then still operational versions happening. So been busy here. I'll turn it back over to Julie to continue talking about the literacy field test programs.
This is Julie. All right, so that was a kind of a quick summary of our math cycle field test, but let's talk about and look at our literacy cycle field test. So this took place over the spring, and we had a total of 72 candidates participate. You'll notice we had, I believe, yes, 6 ECSE programs participate across different pathways. We had 2 DHH programs participate and 1 VI program. So we, again, kudos to these programs for participating and signing up their candidates to be part of this field test. That this work is so important because it gives us that valuable information that we need to make sure this is a valid and reliable assessment. On the next slide, you'll see the timeline for the spring literacy field test. So this we launched in January. We had a due date deadline of April 7th. Meanwhile, in April, once everyone submitted, we were running focus groups and surveys. We're meeting with cooperating teachers, assessors, candidates, and programs to get their feedback on the literacy cycle so that we can, again, make all the revisions that you will see today. We began scoring in late April and into May. It was quite a long time. There was a lot to go through. Again, we had about 78 candidates participate, so there was a lot to be scored. Then in May, we had consensus scoring as well, and that was for PK3, DHH, and VI. And at the June meeting, at the end of this month, I can't believe it's already June, we will be reporting out all of the literacy cycle field test results to the commission, as well as reporting to programs and candidates their scores. They've already been notified if they passed or failed, but in late June, they will receive their full rubric scores as well. And just as a reminder, we wanted to kind of show you again the CalTPA structure and what it looks like across the 2 instructional cycles. Again, there are 2 instructional cycles for candidates to complete to meet the TPA requirement. And within each instructional cycle, there are 4 steps: the planning, where they teach and assess, they reflect, and they apply to future steps. So the first TPA is the math cycle. This is where they are learning about their students with IEPs and planning 1 math lesson. So typically this is done first. And the second TPA is the assessment-driven literacy instruction for students with IEPs. This is where they are planning 3 to 5 literacy lessons. And we will go through and show you more of a deep dive into the math and literacy cycles today. We'll pause for some questions. Okay. Again, you can unmute or just type in the chat. So let's talk about the math cycle. And what was the what precipitated this change for the math cycle? Well, there are a few legislative changes. We had the implementation of SB 488, Senate Bill 488, which restructured the reading competency requirement, and that shifted the RECA assessment into performance assessment. Additionally, we had the adoption of TPE 7, which is effective literacy instruction for all students. So this adoption, Domain 7, affected all of the credential areas as it added additional elements to measure within the performance assessment. So these changes led to the restructuring of why we have the math cycle, and now we have the literacy cycle. And as we look to the next slide, we have our math cycle field test and sort of just a quick overview of the development where CTC staff worked with, experts in the field, an expert pedagogy panel, and we worked to revise what was cycle 1, and we revised and we developed that into the math cycle. This will become operational August 1st. I'm sorry, July 1st, and it'll be available to the field in August. And we will go through those release dates towards the end of this session. Now, the multiple subjects, the Ed specialist, and the PK3 candidates, those are the candidates that will complete the math cycle and the literacy cycle as their performance assessment requirement. And the math cycle field test that was conducted for PK3 and the Ed specialist, DHH, ECSE, and VI concluded in April. And again, results were presented at the April meeting for the ECSE, PK3, and VI. And at the upcoming June meeting, we will also be presenting the results of the DHH field test. So if you're interested, please tune in. And now we're going to get to the good stuff and move into breakout rooms to really look at the math cycle. So if you are here interested in the ECSE math cycle, you are going to join breakout room 1 in just a moment. If you are with VI, you're going to join breakout room number 2. And if you are with DHH, just stay where you are. Don't select a breakout room. And my colleagues, Marissa and Heather, will record their breakout room sessions as well so that we can splice it all together once we share this presentation out. So we can go ahead and put those selections up. And we have 25 minutes and we'll rejoin in this main room. You can go ahead and join now. Again, DHH, stay right where you are. Okay, wonderful. We've got a good DHH group. Okay, and interpreters, please stop me with any questions, and I'll just keep going until you let me know if you have questions. All right, let's go to the next slide and really look at the DHH math cycle.
All right, Julie, I'm going to see if I can get there in one fell swoop, or
All
if I'm
right.
going to have to fast forward through all the slides.
Slide 33.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry. There we go.
There we go. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're going to dive in a little bit and show you what to expect. Again, we're going to go through each of the 4 steps. Just as a reminder, this is a draft. This is based on revisions, but we're still tweaking it. But we have enough to share with you so that you, as programs, can start to make any necessary coursework adjustments, fieldwork adjustments, anything that you might need. Beth Jar needs to be placed in ECSE. Lori, if that's possible, if you could do that. Thanks, Beth. All right, so what can you expect what does step 1 really look like? So again, this is a math focus. So candidates are developing one asset-based UDL-focused math activity, and that includes discourse strategies, ASL, and/or spoken English. I'm not sure why there's a question mark there, but that's okay. Again, that developing an asset-based UDL-focused math activity, that's developing that math lesson based on the students' assets and what their strengths are and what they bring to the classroom. There is an ALD requirement. ALD stands for Academic Language Development. Now, we have an emphasis in the math cycle where candidates are developing an academic language, or ALD, learning goal for their students. So they will be selecting a math learning goal and writing an ALD learning goal. So what is that academic language that the students will need to know for this math lesson. Do they need to know, what does addition mean? What does a divisor? What is a division mean? What is that specific academic language that will help them access the content? The candidate will select their math state standards. Again, this depends on their clinical placement, and we give you A and B. So if your candidate is in a preschool or a TK setting, they will use the preschool transitional kindergarten learning foundations strands, PTKLF. If your candidate is in grade K, all the way up to that adult placement setting, candidates will use the California Common Core State Standards for Math, the CCSM. Candidates will then write there and select a math content and a practice standard. This is really, really important. So in the state standards, strands and standards, they will select a content standard, but then they also have to select a practice. And the practice supports the learning of the content. We have a Venn diagram to show you in a couple slides that kind of better will help you visualize what this looks like. We also have detailed examples in the assessment guide of how to write that learning goal. Then there is an ASL content standard. So if the focus student is an ASL user, the candidate will select one K-12 ASL standard in addition to the grade level content, math content standard and practice. Again, they're prompted in the assessment guide on what to submit and what to write. On our next slide, just a continuation, candidates select a focus student who meets one or more of the following areas. I won't read all of these to you. These are also in the assessment guide. So these are the candidate choices because every clinical placement looks a little different. So we want to give the candidates flexibility. So it could be a student who needs additional support with their academic language. It could be an ASL learner. It could be a student who would benefit from additional support in math. A student who has an IEP goal in math, because again, this is all about the math focus. A candidate whose life experiences inside or outside school, really require that need for additional support and adaptation so that so their well-being needs are met, and now they can better access the math content. You can choose at the bottom in bold, you can choose to plan and teach the lesson for the focus student for DHH, or to plan and teach the lesson for the focus student and additional students. Again, this is more candidate choice for them because we know that in their clinical setting, they might just be working with the focus student, or they might be working with the group plus the focus student. On our next slide, here is the evidence table. Again, this evidence table is in the assessment guide. It shows you which cycle. So in cycle 1, plan. This is the beginning, and this is a sequential steps of what the candidate needs to do in that middle column, and then on the far right, the evidence to support that. So they're working with their cooperating teacher or supervising faculty from their program, and they're just gathering all of that contextual information about their students, because this is all about knowing your kids and now using that information to plan that math lesson. They develop their math lesson with their math content and practice goal and their ALD learning goal. And they will select their focus student and write those adaptations and give an explanation as to why they made those specific adaptations, because again, they're the expert on these children, that they know what's needed to support them. And then they will provide any key lesson resources and or materials. And so the evidence that goes with step 1 planning is part A, B, C, and D. Those are the templates. So in part A, they provide contextual information. That's what they know about the kids. So that's their deep dive into really, explaining how they've gotten to know their kids, their strengths, their assets, their learning needs, things like that. In part B, that is the math lesson plan. So this is their plan for what they're planning to teach. They could also they can use our template, part B, or if you, the program, have a different lesson plan that you prefer that your candidates use, that's fine too. They can use that in lieu of part B. We just ask that you look at our template to make sure that there is alignment with the lesson plan that you are providing to your candidates. Part C, that is where they go into depth about the adaptation for their focus student. And part D, they're just uploading the resources that they're planning and the materials that they're planning to use. So that's step one. And let's look at the next slide. That is their essential questions. The essential questions are really great. So, because this will help you, the program, really hone in on framing out what the candidate needs to do and also what's in the rubrics. So you will see in step one plan, there are 4 rubrics. In rubric 1, this is all about, applying findings, planning that asset-based UDL math lesson. Rubric 1.2, this is all about focus student 1 and their learning needs, their assets, and their related IEP goals and interests, and then creating adaptations. Similarly, 1.3 is all about focus student 2 and their learning needs, assets, and IEP goals. And 1.4 is all about focus student 3 and their learning needs, assets, and related IEP goals. So this is all about those adaptations and how they are going to differentiate their instruction for the 3 focus kids. So that's step 1, plan, and let's move into step 2. So they've planned their math lesson, they've selected their focus students, and now what are they going to do? They're going to teach it, and they're going to assess it. So candidates have the option to submit between 1 and 3 clips. Again, the clips do not have to be 5 minutes in length. Clips can be varying lengths as long as the total does not add up to more than 15 minutes of video. So one clip could be 10 minutes. One clip could be 3 and one clip could be 2. It also doesn't have to add up to 15. That's just the maximum. So candidates have some flexibility as they film their math lesson and they're like, oh, I want them to see this whole 10-minute clip, or I just, I've grabbed what I need to showcase in these, various time clips. So again, more candidate choice. They submit those clips that are reflecting the following 3 things. And again, this is in the guide. And then they use a commentary to really expand and explain their instructional choices, what was happening, in the video. They can really illustrate it. And again, here's another candidate choice. The commentary that they provide, it can be a written narrative, or it could be, they can record and they can sign in ASL, or it could just be a verbal response. If they want to turn on the camera and just talk and just, authentically provide their commentary for the clips that they have submitted. All right, let's go on to look at the rest of step 2. So what does the candidate need to do? We recommend that they record the entire math lesson. So then they can go back and select their 1, 2, or 3 clips. Again, choice point. They will upload those clips in part E. And then in part F, they will write or record or sign their commentary, again, supporting what we will be looking at in the video clips. You'll see the little bullet there under what the candidate can choose to teach the lesson with the focus students or teach the lesson with the focus student and the additional students. So again, choice point. And I think we can move on to the next slide, which is the essential questions. There are 2 rubrics in step 2. 1.5 is how does their instruction lead to the student's active engagement in an asset-based UDL-focused math lesson? Again, using these as part of your coursework and implementing this into your coursework is really highly recommended and effective as well. Also, if you have, fieldwork observation templates that you use and you're pushing in to observe your candidates, these are great things to kind of weave into those fieldwork templates as well, so that candidates start to get very familiar with, showcasing active engagement, writing, building on students' assets, using UDL strategies and things like that. And then 1.6, so looking at the candidate's interactions with the student or the students, and how does that support their progress towards meeting the math. And that should be ALD learning goal. So academic language. See, I told you we'd still need to fix a few things, but we're getting there. Now let's move into step 3. Now this is where we want them to reflect on their planning and their teaching, because no lesson ever goes perfectly. There's always things to look back on. So we want them to deeply look back on the effectiveness of their adaptations that they made for their focus student. And how did those adaptations support that focus child in meeting the math learning goal, the math content, and the practice. Similarly, same thing, look at the effectiveness of their adaptations as the focus student is making progress towards meeting the academic language learning goal that they made. Again, no lesson is ever completely 100% effective. It's okay for candidates to be a little vulnerable and say, I planned for this adaptation. It wasn't effective. Here's why. And because in step 4, they're going to then apply, what they would do for future steps. So I think sometimes candidates feel like they need to be showcase it. Everything was effective. It was wonderful. It was great. And every adaptation I planned went perfectly. But it's okay to be vulnerable and really look deeply and analyze what worked and what didn't work. And that's okay. That's the whole point of reflection. These are also things that you can do in your program as you observe and meet with your candidates and really have those deep reflection, debrief conversations, building into your observation forms, do they plan adaptations for different types of students? And if so, having them reflect. That's a great way to, again, start to mirror some of the tasks that are that you'll see in the CalTPA. Okay, and the next slide is our essential questions. There is one rubric for the math cycle, and this is the evidence table again. Okay, sorry, I don't think I've gone over the evidence table. So in step 3, they reflect on their effectiveness in meeting the math and ALD, and then they use the Part G template, which is their written narrative of their reflection. And there is one rubric and one essential question for step 3, which is on the next slide. Oh, it wasn't there. Okay, well, there is one rubric, I promise you. What to expect for step 4. This is the final step in the instructional cycle. Now they've learned a lot. They've planned, they've taught it, they've reflected on it. And now what do you do with that information? Well, you apply it. And how do you apply it to future steps for math instruction? So the candidate will describe how they plan to advance the students' learning of the math content and practice. And similarly, they'll describe the future steps to advance the students' learning of math academic language. And in our next slide, we have our evidence table. So we want them to, think about what they've learned throughout steps 1, 2, and 3. And now what do they do with that? How will they apply that in future lessons? And the evidence that they will submit is part H, where they can use the written template, or they can provide that ASL or a verbal response that is up to 6 minutes of video. So depending, on their communication preference. For me, I'm more of a written narrative person. But my husband, he would turn on the camera and he'd record a great, kind of verbal response. So again, we just want to allow candidates to have that flexibility. And the next slide, there is one essential question. Oh, okay. This is where they both are. So again, step 3, I mentioned there was one rubric in the reflect, and in step 4, there is one rubric under apply. And these essential questions really frame, again, the work that's in that step. And for you, for programs, this is also a great reference to think about how to embed it in your coursework to better support candidates so that these tasks don't come out of left field for them. They have a little toe dip already into, writing a math lesson, gathering information about students' assets and using UDL strategies and differentiating for different types of learners, thinking about what are their learning needs and what adaptations can I make for them. And did we get through it all, Lori? I think we've got 2 more slides. So I mentioned the Venn diagram. This is where the math strands and standards interact with the practice. So the content with the practice and what does it creates that learning goal. So on the left, if they're in a clinical placement for PK3, if they're in a clinical placement for PK or TK, they will select the California Preschool Transitional Kindergarten Learning Foundations, PTKLF strands. Or if they're in a K all the way up to adult, they would select the math content using the California Common Core. Then on the right is the 8 math practice standards. These are aligned between either setting, either the PTKLF or the Common Core, doesn't matter. They will select one or more math practice. And it's fine just to select one. It's okay. So selecting a math content, a math practice, and you put it together and they write their learning goal for their children, their students. What are they going to know and be able to do? Let's look at an example in the next slide. So here we have an example, and this again is in the assessment guide. So really, have your candidates refer to this, but also get practice with it. So here's an example of how to write a math content and practice learning goal. So you'll see in the middle of the page an example first grade standard. There's a domain, a cluster, and kind of a substandard. Standard 3, applying properties of operations as strategies to add and subtract. So maybe that's, they're working in a first grade setting, so they would select first grade standards using California Common Core. And then under that is the standard for math practice. And let's say they select math practice 5. Use appropriate tools strategically. So let's put the content and the practice together. And here's an example where children will further their understanding of addition and subtraction by composing and decomposing numbers up to 10. That is from the first grade standard, using 2 color counters or two colors of connecting cubes as tools, and that's the practice. So again, just kind of thinking about this, this is something that is really, really new, is using content and practice. So this is something we strongly encourage you as programs to start incorporating early so that your candidates get real familiar with writing a content and practice learning goal. And the screenshot just shows what's in pink is I highlighted there, I highlighted the math content, and in the blue box in yellow, I highlighted the practice. And I know that's a lot so far. Here, again, we're going to share this copy of this presentation. Here are some links to some of the math cycle resources. So you can start to incorporate UDL, look at those California Common Core standards for math, look at those PTKLF strands for the PK/TK settings. There's some kind of sublinks there. I like how the CDE really broke it out nicely. They have an at-a-glance and approach and all kinds of things. And finally, at the bottom, there's a link to just the mathematics framework for California. So hopefully these links will help and support you as you start to incorporate this work into your coursework to better support your candidates as they go through the math cycle. And I will pause for questions, comments. Is there anything else you want me to go back and touch base on in the math cycle? Anything that shocks you or surprises you about this? I think some of the big takeaways for the math cycle is, and what we kind of see with candidates sometimes is, they're getting familiar with writing a learning goal, first of all. Using those state strands or standards to then incorporate that and write it, write that learning goal that's specific for their group that they're working with. So that right there needs lots of support from you in the field, and lots of practice as well. And not only that, but then they also have to write that ALD learning goal. Hi, Amy, welcome. Did you get kicked out of your breakout room? You're in breakout room 1? Okay, good. You're right here with us. So they have to write that ALD learning goal and really think about academic language. The ALD learning goal is not based on a state standard. It is something that they are creating on their own that ties into and supports the learning goal for math. So if they're doing, addition and subtraction, then they would want to incorporate that academic language to support that addition and subtraction lesson that they're teaching. Lori, how are we doing on time?
We've got 1 minute. This is perfect.
Any questions? And also, I will mention that the assessment guide has a pretty robust glossary at the end that candidates can go to when they might be confused about, what do they mean by this? What do they mean by, an inclusive practice, or what do they mean by, um, you know, oh gosh, asset-based, things like that. So there's so much in here that the program, can kind of weave into your coursework, especially asset-based learning. That's something that we see a lot of candidates struggle with. And I think all the groups are coming back now.
Yep, I'm going to close the rooms.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Heather. Right. Are there any questions that we can answer for the good of the group before we head into talking more specifically about literacy?
We have some good questions about literacy, so I think we can hold those, but
All
yeah.
right. Sounds good. Well, we'll head into Senate Bill 488 then, and we'll answer those as we get into literacy and have some time at the end to address questions as well. Okay, so Senate Bill 488 is what started everything, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in depth. I think our slides got a little out of order, but that's okay. So we just wrapped up our literacy field test in all of our credential areas except single subject, because they are the only ones who do not need to take the literacy cycle or the literacy performance assessment, because they also did not have to take RECA. And so we have been working for a little over 2 years with a literacy design team to transition cycle 2 into the literacy performance assessment to become operational this year, of course, pending commission approval. And we'll be presenting the results of our field test in June, and the assessment itself for approval. And so candidates in multiple subject, all 5 ed specialist areas and PK to 3 will complete the literacy cycle as a part of their performance assessment requirement, and to also meet the literacy requirement that was formerly RECA, and that is sunsetting on June 30th. So we have very limited time left with RECA now. And so we are getting really excited to be able to finally share the results of all of this with everybody. So I'm sure most of you have been really involved in the literacy certification process the last few months, maybe even up to a year, really, now at this point. And so we'll go to the next couple of slides and talk a little bit more about Senate Bill 488. That certification process was also outlined in this bill along with the performance assessment. And this bill directed the commission to redesign or to design a performance assessment around literacy to assess candidate competence in evidence-based literacy instruction, specifically around foundational reading skills, and to include tiered supports for pupils who have reading difficulties, English learners, and pupils with exceptional needs. It had to align with the currently adopted ELA/ELD framework. And it also had to align with the current TPEs. Prior to beginning the work on the performance assessment, another work group was convened in order to take a look at the teaching performance expectations. And that work group put together the program standard and TPE Domain 7 around effective literacy instruction. And you'll notice that for our ed specialist groups, there is a unique program standard and TPEs for our ECSE, DHH, and VI groups because literacy instruction for the age ranges and disabilities served by those credential areas is very, very different than what you would be looking at with a typical, a neurotypical first grader, perhaps. So there is definitely unique language in there for those areas, and our performance assessments align with those areas. Additionally, just something that's very interesting is that with RICA, the assessment was developed back around 1997, which is not aligned with the current ELA ELD framework or the Common Core state standards that are currently adopted by the State Board of Education. So the new literacy performance assessment is aligned to both of those things. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. The assessment also has to be aligned to some very specific sections of Ed Code that are outlined related to the organized, systematic, explicit skills related to foundational reading. You'll see those words direct, systematic, explicit quite frequently in the bill as well as in the TPEs and the assessment. There's also language around the strong literature, language, and comprehension component and a balance of oral and written language. I do always like to point out with the ed specialist group that this language is in Ed Code. When they're talking about oral and written language, it really is more speaking to expressive and receptive language. So it's not a literal use of those words when we're talking about speaking and listening. So that is just something to take into consideration. We do have different language in our assessments around those areas for students who use AAC or sign or other ways to communicate. It also needs to speak to ongoing diagnostic techniques that inform teaching and assessment, early intervention, and all of this takes place in their clinical practice. On the next slide, it also speaks to the assessment aligning with the assessment design standards that speak to the validity, reliability, and sponsor support. So the model sponsor is needing to maintain the assessment. And we also have to provide evidence of the candidate's knowledge, skills, and abilities as outlined in the assessment design standards and the TPEs. Apologies to the interpreters. I'm sorry, I lost you on my screen and I wasn't able to track where you were at. I have you repinned now. On our next slide, we have our graphic of the circles of implementation from the ELA ELD framework. We're going to focus on the 5 smaller circles that are in the center. Those are the 5 cross-cutting themes from the ELA ELD framework. And you'll notice that they align with TPEs that are in each of the TPEs for Domain 7. There's foundational skills, effective expression, meaning making, language development, and content knowledge. Foundational skills is often spoken about separately within the legislation and the performance assessment. That's due to the way it's spoken about in Senate Bill 488, but it is considered one of the 5 cross-cutting themes in the framework. And then when we speak about the additional themes, we're speaking about the other four: effective expression, meaning making, language development, and content knowledge. And the reason they're called cross-cutting themes is because they represent the interconnectedness of the strands of the ELA literacy Common Core state standards, which are reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. This is also true of the strands in the preschool TK learning foundations. They have the same categories. Moving further in the circles, you also have the ELD standards. There's also that interconnected relationship there. And there are three parts to the ELD standards: interacting in meaningful ways, learning about how English works, and using foundational skills. And all of these items work together in order to create the literacy expectations for students in schools, and candidates use all of these within the new literacy cycle. Going to our next slide, we'll speak a little more about ELD. ELD is required in the literacy cycle for all submissions, even if the candidate does not have English learners in their clinical practice placement or in their group or as their focus student. That is due to the language in Senate Bill 488 with requiring the competency of evidence-based literacy instruction for English learners. So candidates will provide ELD strands or standards and goals. And the role of ELD standards is to really amplify any type of content standard that they are paired with when you're working with integrated ELD. In this case, it's with the ELA literacy standards. And what's really lovely about the way the document is put together for the ELD standards is that it aligns those standards with the ELA literacy standards. So once a candidate has selected what they are going to work on, they can take a look at that document and see what ELD standard aligns with the ELA literacy standard they have selected. So within their submissions, on the next slide, candidates are planning for foundational reading skills and one or more of the additional themes from the ELA ELD framework. We have some resources around foundational reading. These are in the Google folder. The first one is particularly helpful if you have candidates placed with students in the older grades around what foundational skills might look like for students who are older. It's also really helpful for looking at the chapter examples for grade levels for the ELA ELD framework itself. If you're not sure what language development looks like in an 11th grade classroom, you can go straight to that chapter and it gives you a great outline of what that looks like. And then there's the standards themselves. I'll go ahead and pause for some questions just about that overview for literacy before we go back into our breakout rooms to go over the specific contents for each of the credential areas for the literacy cycle. Okay, I think I will let us head back to our breakout rooms and then we can address any questions after we review the contents of the cycle.
Okay, this is Julie. Now we get to go over the literacy cycle. Again, just tell me to pause if you have any questions. All right. So what can you expect in this literacy cycle? This is where the candidate is planning 3 to 5 lessons, uh, literacy lessons that it will include one focus student. This is so the 3 to 5 lessons we refer to as a learning segment. And that will address the teaching and the assessment of the foundational reading skill or skills that they select, as well as the additional theme or themes that they select. And those additional themes, as a reminder, is meaning making, effective expression, language, and content knowledge. So there's a lot that goes into planning those 3 to 5 lessons. They will also include the integrated ELD, regardless of the group, regardless if the group contains English learners or not. Doesn't matter. They will include their ELD learning goal. So each of the literacy lesson needs to include an ELA/literacy learning goal and one ELD learning goal based on, the age level, based on the age or grade of the students that they are teaching. And we have aligned language in this assessment to the ELA ELD framework, as well as other state documents, such as the California Dyslexia Guidelines. You will also notice that we use words like formative and summative assessment. Formative is that informal assessment, and summative is that more formal assessment. All right, we can move on. There's more within planning. This is the big step, right? So in the literacy cycle, they select one focus student who can meet the following criteria, such as an ASL learner. They might be an English learner. They might have a literacy-related disability, such as dyslexia. They might have an IEP goal in the area of foundational reading skills, or just a student who would benefit from making progress in meeting the ELA literacy standards. There's lots of candidate choice here. And as we look at the evidence table for step 1 planning, so that again, they're working closely with their cooperating teacher and or their supervising faculty, and they're really going over that recent literacy assessment data. They're looking at IEP information. They're looking at any other contextual information so that they can make and develop good literacy lessons based on what they know about their students. They also select their focus student, and they go through that learning segment template to really describe their 3 to 5 lessons, as well as their corresponding assessments. Because this literacy cycle is not only 3 to 5 lessons, but it's also incorporating that assessment data, assessment-driven data. So how does the results drive your instruction, your planning, your reflection, and your application for future steps, because that information about your students all along the way is going to drive your next choice. So this again is a choice point and so a place where you, the program, can really incorporate that into coursework for students. So they select their foundational reading skill, and they select the additional theme or themes to support that foundational reading skill. They will write a ELA literacy learning goal, and they will write an ELD learning goal. We also have examples in the assessment guide of these learning goals, just suggestions so you can support your candidates. The evidence for step 1 is part A, that contextual information, just like they did in the math cycle. Part B is that learning segment template. So this can be up to 6 pages per lesson, not in total. In part C, they can write a narrative describing their assessments, their formative and summative assessments that they will be using in their lessons, plural, sorry. And in part D, they will upload a description or upload a blank copy of their summative assessment and the rubric or the performance criteria that supports that assessment. These are just blank copies in part D, because this is the planning. This is what they're planning to use. All right, let's go to the next slide where we look at the essential questions. So in step 1 plan, there are 2 rubrics. Rubric 2.1, again, this is about the candidate's learning segment and how does it leverage students' assets. What are the included assessments? How are they aligning the lessons to create a progression of learning? And how are they addressing collaboration with instructional support personnel? It's one thing to say, yeah, I have support in the classroom, but I'm not using them. That's not what we're looking for. We want candidates to really think and plan how they're going to use any instructional support personnel that are available to them in the teaching of these lessons. This might be a paraprofessional. This might be a speech language pathologist. This might be the gen ed teacher. This might be any of those personnel that would support the teaching and support the students in this lesson. So they should definitely think about how they're going to utilize personnel in their teaching. And in rubric 2.2, they apply these findings from the literacy assessments. So they've done their research, they've looked at this assessment data, and now they're planning for their selected foundational reading skill using a direct, systematic, and, in bold, explicit approach. These are things you can go to the glossary and look up. Again, these are very important that candidates are incorporating into their planning of these literacy lessons. And they'll also incorporate their selected additional theme from the ELA ELD framework. Those were the 4 I mentioned earlier: meaning making, effective expression, and all of this goes into the planning. So this is, as you can see, 3 to 5 lessons. This is a much bigger deal than math cycle. So, but what is similar to the math cycle is with math, they had to select a content and a practice to create the learning goal. And in the literacy, they select a foundational reading skill and an additional theme to write the learning goal. So in that way, they're very similar. As we go on to step 2, where they teach and assess, what can you expect? So they have, again, choice point. They can select 1 to 4 video clips as long as the total time does not exceed 20 minutes. Now, there is a focus on the selected foundational reading skill, of course, and their instruction in use of the additional theme, how they are utilizing formative assessment, how are they adjusting their instruction in the moment, and how are they using integrated ELD. Candidates can provide written, ASL, or verbal commentary. Their choice was their reflecting on their video clips that they submitted. It really does help. As someone who is looking at the video clips, it helps to hear or read their commentary to see some of their instructional choices and what was happening with the students in the videos and things like that. As we go to the next slide, the essential questions, I believe there are 4. Oh, this is the evidence table. Jumping ahead of myself. So what do they need to do in step 2? They teach and record their 3 to 5 lessons, and they select 1 to 4 clips, and they provide that commentary, verbal or written. And the evidence that goes along with step 2 is those uploaded part E, the video clip or clips. And in part F, they provide and upload their commentary, written, ASL, or verbal is fine. And the essential questions. There are 4 rubrics in step 2. These, again, are great. This is a great reference for you, the program, on how you might be incorporating the tasks into your coursework. Working with your candidates on how, as you push into their classroom and do one of your 12 observations, how are they providing their instruction in selected foundational reading skills? Are they using a direct and systematic approach? Are they doing and utilizing active engagement with students? And how does that support their progress? So a lot of these essential questions are tasks that they can be doing in their program. We just highly encourage programs to review these essential questions with their candidates as well, so that they can frame out what's expected in the rubric, also be looking at the rubric. We've embedded the rubrics throughout the assessment guide. So at the end of step 1, you'll see the 2 rubrics that relate to step 1. At the end of step 2 instructions in the guide, you'll see the 4 rubrics for step 2 teach and assess. So these are things that you can start to go over with your candidates. And as we go to the next slide, step 3, what to expect as they reflect. So here in this step, again, we want them to analyze and reflect on their summative assessment responses for the group of student. Again, I told you we need to still update. They can analyze the summative assessment for the group that they were teaching, including their focus student, or they could analyze the summative assessment response for just their focus student. Again, this depends on their clinical placement and what works. They'll focus on understandings, gaps in knowledge, and or misconceptions that that went into maybe the summative assessment results. So really, this is assessment-driven instruction. So in this step, it is imperative that candidates deeply analyze those assessment results. And because they've planned it, they've taught it, and now they're reflecting on it. So now they've scored it, and they're looking at it, and they're deeply thinking about why or how their candidate might have done on the assessment, and and thinking about maybe how their planning and or their teaching might have played a role in that. So this is a deep analysis section. They will also submit their focus student summative assessment response. So they'll score it out, and they'll provide and upload the scored rubric or the performance criteria and their summative assessment feedback. So let's look at this a little deeper as we go to the next slide. In the evidence table, So you can see there's many steps here in step 3. They've provided the student with the summative assessment. They're determining student progress in meeting the ELA, literacy, and ELD goals. They're analyzing student results and providing the student or students, depends, with that specific actionable feedback. So what does that mean? Doesn't mean just good job, high five, here's your results, you did great, goodbye. No, this means specific and actionable. So, these are things that we have seen over time that new teachers struggle with is how can they provide that specific actionable feedback to students so that the student is clear on how they did and what they need to do to improve on their work. And good job and attaboy just doesn't summarize all that they need to do to improve. So this is, again, an area where you can support your candidates on specific actionable feedback. The candidate reflects on the student or students' progress and the effectiveness of their instruction. And that's an important step in learning to grow as a teacher. And they submit and upload the focus students' summative assessment response and the scored rubric, the criteria, and their actionable feedback. So the evidence that they submit in step 3, is part G, where they upload the focus students' summative assessment. In part H, they upload the focus students' summative assessment actionable feedback. They can do up to 5 minutes of a video or an audio file if they prefer to film how they are providing that specific actionable feedback with the focus student. So if they prefer to do a video, that's fine, or just an audio file is fine, or they can certainly use our template. I'm sorry, it's an upload. It's not a template in part H, excuse me. So part H, they might provide if it's written, if that's what they want to provide, they might upload how they provided that written actionable feedback to the focus student. And in part I, they provide a written narrative really reflecting and analyzing those summative assessment results. And that's a key. Again, I can't mention it enough. It's a key factor in step 3, an area that we've seen historically where candidates struggle. And as we look at step 3 rubric, essential questions, well, we don't have it. Okay. Oh, I bet it's at the end. So hold on to that. What to expect in step 4, where they apply and think about future steps. So here they're planning to support that focus student and they want to support their literacy development. They have the option to include additional children who require similar support. So they're planning on how they're going to support, right? This is that apply next steps. So they have the option. They can do a reteach option that is focused on targeted intervention or individualized strategies. And that's going to help the student meet that ELA or literacy and the ELD goal. Or instead of a reteach, they might opt to do an extension activity where they're focusing on deepening or advancing that the student's learning in relation to ELA and ELD. So which option do they pick? Well, it depends on the data. It depends on the data that they've collected. So they would know and they would have analyzed the data in step 3, and that is going to drive their choice for, yeah, my students did poorly on the summative assessment, scoring only 40%, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, I'm going to do a reteach of this lesson, and I'm going to do a targeted intervention in this manner. Or based on the data, my students did fantastic. They got a 99%. So I'm going to extend this lesson and I'm going to deepen and advance their learning in relation to ELA and ELD goals. Again, candidates have the option for written ASL or verbal commentary. Now, as we look at the evidence table, I think is next. So in step 4, they think about that data. Now they're going to do a reteach or extension. They're going to record a follow-up activity. So they're not using the same video that they used in step 2. This is a brand new activity. And then they select a clip and provide commentary. If you look at the evidence on the right, so they have their narrative about why they selected a reteach or an extension, and they describe it. In part K, they upload their video clip of the follow-up activity. Remember, this is not a video from step 2. This can be up to 5 minutes of video. And in part L, they provide that commentary describing what we're seeing in the video clip of the follow-up activity. Again, it could be written ASL, or they can turn on the camera and just do a verbal response. Up to 5 minutes of ASL or verbal commentary. So that is a high-level overview of the literacy cycle. And here are the 2 essential questions. There is 1 rubric in step 3 and 1 rubric in step 4. And as we move on to the next slide.
There aren't any more slides.
There are not any more slides. So perfect stop. Time for me to stop and answer questions. I would just highly recommend, as you prepare your candidates for the literacy cycle, to deeply and thoroughly review foundational reading skills so that they are selecting a foundational reading skill that is appropriate to the age or grade level that they are teaching, as well as reviewing ways of how to incorporate the additional theme into their literacy lessons that supports that foundational reading skill. So if their foundational reading skill, if they're teaching first grade and they've selected phonics as their foundational reading skill, and now they've selected, effective expression as their additional theme to support phonics, then how are they using that? And they need to deeply go into depth about how they're going to be utilizing the foundational reading skill of phonics and the additional theme in their literacy lessons that they're planning for. And I think we can wait for the group will be joining us in just a few minutes. And thank you, interpreters. I hope I didn't go too fast.
Yeah, we're just waiting on ECSE is still finishing up step 4.
Okay. Well, everybody gets a break for 2 minutes.
think we have everybody back. This is Heather. We can go ahead and take some questions if there are any.
We had some very ECE specific questions regarding program pathways, and I think that they need to be elevated beyond this webinar because we're talking about not just performance assessment, we're talking about RECA, we're talking about credential pathways. And so if you could, I don't want to say your name incorrectly.
Yeah, go by Jilly, but Connie has her hand raised too. She's also a faculty and part of the CSU system.
Okay. Right. If you could put something in either the chat or email it to us, so that way we can make sure to elevate your questions to the right people. We're really only performance assessment here, and we do have other folks that are within the ECE world that have more very domain specific knowledge on this that will be able to answer your question more appropriately, if that's acceptable. Heather, what do you think?
I was just going to say to add on to that, yes, because I know it's kind of ironic because we're replacing an exam, and exams and performance assessment are actually separate departments for us. So we've been doing a lot of collaboration, but we're not the same. So if you could email those to literacy@ctc.ca.gov, I am happy to get that information for you and connect you with the right person to get you that answer that you might need that we might not be able to provide for you today. And that we'll be able to, I'm sure, find the information.
Sounds good. Thanks.
And then Connie, I see your hand is up.
Hi, I was just wondering, for those of us who participated in the field test, will we get score breakdowns from the field test, or is that up to the candidates to send those to us if they want?
I'll let Lori speak to that, or Xavier from Evaluation Systems.
Yeah, hi, Connie. This is Lori. Yes, programs will receive detailed reports, cycle and requirements level reports like you do for all of the operational scoring for the field test on June 27th.
Okay, so when candidates get theirs, we'll get a
You'll get
summary of everybody's. Okay.
Through ed reports.
And then I saw that for the field test, we got a document to submit to our credential office that can be used to waive the RECA. That's separate. But in the future, to demonstrate the passage of the LPA, how do candidates register? Do they have to have it sent to our university, or do we get something at the end, or just my credential office was asking me how to deal with the CalTPA results.
Lori, I believe that for the operational versions, when candidates register, they select their institution, right?
Correct.
That they are affiliated with.
Correct.
And then the results are then reported to the program after the assessment is scored. And then that is then how they're able to make the recommendation once they've completed all requirements.
Yeah, when I was program coordinator, oftentimes candidates would have their score reports as well, and they could submit those, and then our credential analyst would verify them via ed reports. And so whatever process that you have in place to collect all those documents to put into their candidate file, it would just be a new process for teacher performance assessments and going forward, whatever ends up working out best for each individual program. But yeah, candidates do get a PDF score report that they could submit, and then I always check them because it's important to verify that they are official score reports.
Okay, thank you. Just one more quick question. Sorry. I know I asked about the submission dates. And I know it rests on a bunch of other things too. Is it planned that there's going to just be one submission date in the fall and one submission date in the spring, or is it going to be like more often than that? Just in terms of trying to plan for next year on, when to have candidates take the LPA.
Sure. We have it almost finalized. I think actually we might be sharing it out at the coordinator meeting later on this week. Maybe I'll probably put that in the Google folder maybe later on this week. But they're approximately once a month, I would say. That's like a pretty good estimate. Beginning in, Lori, what is it?
September.
Right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I don't have it open in front of me. But yeah, so about once a month they can submit, and then after the submission deadline, they'll get their scores 3 weeks later.
Yeah, it's a rolling submission process. Candidates can submit any time, 365 days out of the year. But there are only select points in time where we gather all the submissions that have been collected up to that date, and then we score them and report them out on a specific date. So if a candidate misses a particular submission deadline, they just get put into the next window, score window.
And we'll be holding another webinar. I think it's later on this summer or in August. I can't quite put my finger on the date right now, but when we have the materials ready to share, going over the registration process, the dates, the scoring, we didn't want to, we already might have overwhelmed you with information, so we didn't want to completely overwhelm you with all of the information all at once. So we're trying to kind of give it in stages. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Julie to take us through the last part of our presentation. We'll try and get you out of here on time.
All right, this is Julie. We wanted to share just briefly the TPEs, the teaching performance expectations that are being measured in each of these unique assessments. So if we look at the first one, we will provide you with a TPE matrix. This is for early childhood special education, for specifically the math cycle. So you will see the different elements that are unique to the math cycle for ECSE, for TPEs 1 through 7. And as we go to the next slide, you will see the TPEs measured in the literacy cycle for ECSE. Now, as you look at TPE 7, that's that effective literacy instruction, you'll see towards the bottom where it says candidate option elements 6, 7, 8, or 9. That is referring to the additional theme that the candidate selects. So that's why it's an option, as it is dependent on what they are using in their literacy lessons. So again, this is a good reference as you are planning out what is being measured. And as we go to the next slide, let's look at the math cycle TPE matrix for DHH. And you will see the TPEs being measured in that specific instructional cycle. And in the next slide, you will see the DHH literacy cycle. TPEs being measured, again, TPE 7 for effective literacy instruction. We have the candidate options at the bottom of TPE 7. And the next two are for our VI group for math cycle. You will see the different elements being measured for VI in math, and the final slide is for the VI for literacy. So these are good. This is a good point of reference to have on hand for programs. I think we're going to move into Marissa's section.
All right, thank you,
How
Julie.
do you embed it? Yes.
Yes, how do I embed this in my program? How do I move forward and teach this stuff? All right, let's take a look. So Program Standard 5B, candidate preparation and support. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it's important that as a program, you understand that yes, you can read these things. Yes, you can talk with candidates about these. Yes, you can watch their videos with them. Yes, you can have them work with each other. Yes, you can make assignments in your classes where they do these things. Yes, you can give them feedback. Absolutely. No, you cannot do it for them. It's their turn to do this activity. It shouldn't be you doing all the work. It should be them. But if you see something in their plan, you can ask them questions. Well, why did you make that choice? Why did you do that? And get some more information. If you have a candidate that is struggling around English language development and they need some resources, here are 3 resources. Here are some strategies you can try. That is all acceptable support in outlined within our standards. There's this misconception out there that it's a test and you can't touch it. And that's not how it's designed to be. So I want to make sure that's very clear that yes, we can support candidates through these tasks. And if you are not supporting candidates through these tasks, you are not serving them the way that they should be served. So it's important. So we can go to the next slide. So program faculty and other educators, they should be providing guidance, coaching, facilitation. We are teaching candidates how to be teachers. And that shift, I think that's one of the hardest things in a credentialing program is shifting from being a learner to being the teacher. Oftentimes they've like, I've been in school for 20 years. I can do this whole thing, but they've never been on the other side of it where they're having to set it up. So we should be facilitating this learning. We should be supporting them. We should be working with them. And as we're going forward, there are not going to be very many models that we're going to have because it's still very, very new. But as you have candidates that complete this and pass, ask them if you can have their documents and create a library of support for other candidates in your program. We need to be very careful with any videos that have children in them. We want to make sure we're not sharing those far and wide, but having model materials that you build in your own program, absolutely an excellent way of supporting candidates. Let's go ahead and next slide. Sorry, I'm just kind of talking about things. Yeah, so reading those submissions, reviewing those rubrics. A strategy that I used when I was faculty and I was managing candidates through their TPA is teaching them how to turn rubrics into questions. It asks you for a strand and or standard and a practice. Well, where is it? Color code it for me, identify it for me, point it out for me, so that way I can see that you have it. That is absolutely acceptable support. Using the rubrics on coursework and in discussion. They shouldn't be at the end, right? They should be all the way through as we're supporting candidates. Those rubrics are very clear in describing what a candidate needs to do to meet competency. So use those rubrics, read them together. I used to have candidates read them in class because I tell them to read them before class and they're busy and driving to class or doing what have you. Just making the time in class to just very clearly go through these things. It was very helpful. Next slide, please. Expectations, just very clear. And one thing that I would often do when I'd be sitting in these and listening to spots and data where other candidates struggled, I made sure I let candidates know. Other candidates struggle around writing these ELD standards, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do that well, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to make sure that we are working on it. We're going to make sure that everyone understands because we're going to move at the speed of community. We want to make sure that we are all going to become teachers together. And so building that cohesiveness in a class is helpful. And another important thing is using the glossary to align vocabulary to make sure that candidates all have a mutual understanding of what they are expected to do, and professional writing. So oftentimes people don't use capitals like they're supposed to, and periods like there is no spot in the rubric for that, but recognize that the people that are scoring these are all teachers, and it may really annoy them if the candidate isn't using professional writing skills. So this is graduate level work. That's what I tell the candidate. Your graduate level work, guys. We can do this. Okay, next slide, please. These maps are all in the resource folder. There are some just ways to think about candidates, and I would have them visualize in the first class, close your eyes, visualize what you're going to look, how you're going to feel, how you're going to look when you finish your credential, what are you going to do to celebrate? Let's think about that first. Okay, now let's make a map of how we're going to get there. Right? Because we can have all these ideas and goals, but a plan on how to get there, that's not just something we're excited about. It's something that we're going to do. Next slide, please. These are required supports. They are listed on our website. Please explain the guides to the candidates. Please explain the rubrics. Please engage the candidates in formative learning experiences. As a coordinator for intern programs, I used to give the candidates a teacher performance assessment lesson plan activity where they had to go through and understand it, because it was that plan, teach and assess, reflect and apply. That theory of action was there. And so by putting it in front of people as soon as possible, it's helpful. And also candidates who are not successful. Hopefully their first submission will be their only submission because it'll be their best work. But if there's someone that's not successful, there needs to be targeted intervention, and that you are required to support them through that. Next slide. There's a whole lot of acceptable things that we can do. And if you're thinking, well, I don't know what's acceptable or not, just think about it. Is this my work or is this their work? And that's what I tell faculty. If it's your work, like the faculty's work, then it's probably not acceptable. If it's the candidate's work because you gave them 3 different options of support and resources, then it's definitely acceptable. And all of these things are on our website, and we'll have lots of different learning opportunities as we go. Next slide. Unacceptable support, right? This right here it's when it's your work. You're telling them what to do. You're telling them specific things that they should do this instead of what they have. Those are the unacceptable pieces. Candidates will rise to you, and you can provide them lots of support and help. Just don't do it for them. All right. I think the last piece here is for you, Heather. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I think we'll actually we'll speak more to the program coordinator role the next time we're all together. I'll leave the slides in the slide deck for you all to take a look at when we upload that, but we'll go ahead and skip to the next steps just to honor your time. I know it's noon right now, and we said we would get you out of here at noon, and I don't want to hold you over much longer. So just as a reminder, the full results of our LPA or literacy field test and the extended math cycle field test will be presented at the June commission meeting. So you are welcome to tune in to watch that and to see those results and read those items. And so that's when we will propose the passing standards and the official adoption of those assessments. And if we could go to the next slide, Xavier or Lori, do you want to speak to the materials?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
So just a quick high level will be that the materials will be available on August 26th. So the assessment guides, templates, and rubrics. So these are the final materials. However, we're going to get watermark drafts to you as soon as possible. So it says at an earlier date. So probably within, shouldn't commit to a date, but it'll be earlier in the summer. Just to help you and support you as you're trying to get things ready and developed. And then candidates will also be able to register on that August 26th date. So basically, the system will be up and everything ready and available, both materials as well as registration on August 26th. Beth, question.
Yeah, I know you don't want to commit to a date for the watermark drafts, but in reference to the backwards mapping or planning, it's really difficult to map, backwards map if we don't have the materials. And then our classes, I don't know about everybody else, but start in July. And so we're already a good month ahead before the other materials come out to really help. So we want to support our candidates, but if we don't have materials, we can't start.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I'll speak specifically to literacy. We can't release anything until the commission officially approves the assessment and a passing standard for that and for the DHH math cycle at the June commission meeting, which takes place at the end of the month. They have to formally adopt the assessment and a passing standard before we can give anything to the field, and they may request adjustments or specific things. We can't speak to what they may or may not say or do at the end of this month. And so unfortunately, that is keeping us from being able to get you what you need. And we completely understand. I mean, we've all been there with planning and wanting to get everything in place. And so we are working as fast as we can to get everything to you all as fast as we can. We know that it's important to have it to plan. We know. As soon as we can get it to you, it's going to you guys. I promise. We do have office hours available starting back up in September for you all to come to and ask questions. For program office hours are going to be the first and third Fridays for ed specialists from 10 to 10:30. They'll resume right after Labor Day. We took a little pause for the summer break, but you're welcome to email any of our inboxes. And candidate office hours will be held on Wednesdays as well for candidates to come ask questions about their performance assessment. And that will again resume after Labor Day. But in the meantime, you're welcome to contact us at any time. We all monitor our CalTPA inboxes, and those emails are on the next slide. So if you have any specific questions around ed specialists, you can contact, these are our listservs. I forgot that we had the listservs now. So you can sign up to get updates when we push those out. We'll have those links in the PowerPoint. And then on the next slide is the inboxes related to TPA and Pearson, and we'll make sure that's in there as well, but we all monitor those. And I think that's it. Thank you all for being here with us today. We know that was a lot of information and we really appreciate it. And we'll make sure that the slides go into the folder today, and we'll get the recording out to everybody as soon as IT can get it up on the YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so here we're going to be talking about the early childhood special education math cycle overview. So we can go to the next slide. So what to expect in step one plan. And I know that there is a variety of experiences in the room, whether you have been working with operational or in that space, but because we don't haven't all been in that space, we want to make sure to go through this carefully. And so some of it might be information you already know, but I want to just make sure that's level for everyone. So the math cycle is to be completed with children ages 3 and up. And so that's an important piece there for instructional planning, placement planning. It's intended to be completed with kiddos 3 and up. The math focus, they will develop one play-based UDL-focused math activity that leverages the children's assets, whether they be cultural or linguistic, and or interests. So assets and interests, who we are, the languages we speak, where we come from, all those things are assets, and interests are all the things that kiddos like and kiddos are engaged by. There is a requirement for academic language development. So there's an emphasis on developing the academic language in math. So we want to be using correct terminology and ensuring that students are building that language. There are math state standards depending upon the clinical placement for a preschool and TK setting. Preschool or the PTKLF is definitely appropriate for kinder and above setting, kinder settings really, because this is ECSE, apologies. I get confused with PK3 because it goes with third all the way up to third grade. But for K settings, the Common Core state standards. Now, this is the part that can be tricky for candidates. Candidates need to create a goal with content and practice. So candidates will create learning goals that integrate both a content standard and a math practice, ensuring that math concepts are not only introduced and applied through developmentally appropriate and meaningful activities, and there are detailed examples in the assessment guides as they come up. But it's important that as candidates are writing their math goals, that they include both content and practice. We can take a look at the next slide. So in continuing, cycle 1 plan is a big chunk of the rubrics and the performance assessment. The candidates will select a focused child who meets one or more of the following criteria. Only has to be one. If they fit in more spots, that's all good as well. So they may benefit from additional support with academic language development. They may be an English learner, whether they are district identified or not. A kiddo that may benefit from additional support making progress towards the math content strands or standards or math practices. They may have a developmental delay. They have a math or pre-academic IEP goal. They have a life experience, either inside or outside of school, that may result in a need for additional adaptations to support their well-being, or a student whose behavior in class catches the candidate's attention. The candidate may choose to facilitate the activity with the focus child or to facilitate with the focus child and additional children. So this can be a one-on-one activity. The only concern that we have seen is if this one stinks and it's a one-off, but a candidate who working with one focus child and that focus child moves, or they move, and so it's sometimes it could be a little challenging, but a lot of times that one-on-one instruction is how instruction is delivered. So the candidate does have that choice point. Take a look at the next one. Yeah, so this is from the evidence table from the proposed guide. Again, until we get final stamp on all of these things at the June Commission meeting, we can't have materials ready to go, but with guidance and support from the cooperating teacher, supervising faculty, the candidate is to gather and review all contextual information about the children. And they should be supported by a lot of people, right? They should have their cooperating teacher or their faculty member who is instructing them in this course. They're supervising faculty. So when I was a program coordinator, I called it the triangle of support, right? Because there should be a lot of people around the candidate as they're doing these things. They need to select a focus child. If they choose to work with a group of 3, the focus child should be one of those 3 when they make this plan. But they select one focus child and they develop one play-based UDL focused math activity that leverages their assets and or interests and includes 2 goals: math content and practice goal, and then an academic language goal. So the math that they're going to do and how they're going to communicate about it. Those are the 2 goals that we're focusing on. And the candidate can choose the activity for the focus student or for the focus student and additional children that require similar supports. The candidate is to provide an explanation of the specific adaptations for the focus child and rationale for them, and provide key instructional resources, materials related to the math activity. And oftentimes, candidates take pictures of things, scans of materials. With little guys, they need to be engaged, hands-on. I often encouraged candidates to stay away from like a worksheet when working with kiddos, to use more manipulatives, more activities, a lot of interaction. That typically was more helpful to little guys rather than just handing out worksheets. And so just piece of advice for you all to hand on over. These are on the next column is all the evidence to be submitted. So there are either templates or resources that the candidate will just upload. And like I said, sometimes folks just take a picture, upload that. I used to see candidates use like a blank either PowerPoint or Google slide and just put the pictures in there and submit that evidence. They can submit up to 7 pages of evidence of materials. And the next one. So these are some of the essential questions, or these are the essential questions for step 1. And each one of the essential questions is that level 3 of requirement within the rubrics. And so taking a look at the rubric 1 is applying findings. So the candidate needs to have access to recent math information, including assessments, IEP goals, what they were based on, anything observation that they've seen, conversations with their cooperating teacher. Then how does the candidate plan the math activity in a safe, positive environment? And we're not talking about pretty walls and decorations and such. I would tell candidates that they are the environment. Who they are and what they do and how they create that space is the environment. So what are they doing to be that safe and positive space? And how are they promoting, right, movement towards those goals, the math, content and practice, and academic language goals. The next rubric has to do with collaborate and or facilitate instructional support personnel. And this one can be challenging, especially if there's short staffing. I would encourage candidates to engage and collaborate with these instructional support personnel, and they don't just have to be paraprofessionals. That could be a cooperating teacher. It could be a speech and language pathologist, as long as it makes sense to the activity. You don't want a candidate to just collaborate with someone like an occupational therapist, and they're not doing anything with occupational therapy in their lesson. But if they are doing an activity that involves some kind of, physical therapy, occupational therapy, to collaborate with that instructional support personnel would be very appropriate, right? And then the last piece here is, how does the candidate apply recent information to plan adaptations for that focus student based on their cultural and linguistic assets and interests? And I think it's very important to impress upon all candidates that everybody has culture. Everybody has linguistic assets. Everybody comes from a space, and we don't come as an empty cup to school. We come with lots of things in that cup, and we need to use those to move forward. And the strongest submissions are the ones that really know, you could tell the candidate knows the children and they know their community and they work forward with them. But they can always use their interests to keep the kiddos interested and active and engaged as well. So if a candidate feels more comfortable using interests that are tied to their IEP goals and can move them forward, then they can choose either way. Are there any questions around step one plan? Okay, then let's go ahead and check in to look at step two, teach and assess. So
15 more minutes, Marissa.
What was that?
Just being timekeeper, we got about 15 more minutes.
Sure. So step two, teach and assess. We're submitting 1 to 3 video clips, no more than 15 minutes total. So one video clip could be 10 minutes and one video clip could be 5, and then they don't have a video clip 3. It's however they'd like to do that. They will be submitting video clips that reflect the, like active math learning, math academic language, and monitoring the children's math thinking and interactions. Oftentimes it's easier to have 3 things in 3 videos, but it's however the candidate, they have this choice point. And the candidates will be using commentary. For those of you who've participated in the pilot, you're familiar with this commentary template instead of annotations for those of you who are working with operational. But for those of you who are not, instead of a video clip where you have to identify a point in the video and then a box pops up and you select a drop down menu what it is and then type in their characters, it's a Word document template where the candidate says, at this point in the video I did this and this is why. The commentary can also be verbal or ASL as well, so the candidate is able to have another choice point there. Go to the next slide. So this is where the candidate's going to record the whole math activity and pull clips. The worst thing I ever saw, aside from a phone falling down or someone's mom calling because they recorded on their video and they didn't put it on airplane mode that cut their video, is a candidate who had a video and then pulled a clip and then deleted the rest of the video. And so I often tell the candidates, record it, put a copy of that original somewhere, then make a copy of that, then pull your clip from there. So video clips and commentary are the evidence that are submitted from step 2, teach and assess. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Right, and these are the essential questions. So how does the candidate create and sustain the safe, positive learning environment, apply UDL focused strategies, and look at that content, practice, and ALD goal, and how does the candidate engage the children? So these are the very active pieces, and oftentimes in the rubric, it might say, how do they describe or how do they demonstrate? And so typically that demonstrate is the video and describe is that commentary. Go ahead and take a look at the next slide. So reflect. This is where the candidate is looking at the effectiveness of their adaptations. And do impress upon your candidates that even if they weren't very effective, they can say that. They can say, this was not effective because of this, and think about it, because this is a learning opportunity, right? It doesn't have to be the most perfect lesson ever, right? And they can reflect on the effectiveness of their adaptations for the focus students towards making progress towards both the learning goal, including that content practice, and the academic language goal. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So really it's what was effective, what did the kiddos learn, and what did the candidate learn about facilitating this math activity. Go to the next slide. And then taking a look at step 4, describing future steps to advance the math learning. And candidates get tripped up on this step too because they think about like next year. It's really what you're going to do to advance the math learning of these kiddos moving forward. So it's not that we're going to go to lunch next. It's what we're going to do next activity in the math sequence, and describing future steps for both the math content and practices and to support academic language development. Take a look at the next slide. So this one here is what did the candidate learn, and making sure that they are citing evidence. So in my plan, I did this. In my videos, you might have seen this. In my reflection, this happened. And now, because of all of those things, bringing them together, I'm going to move forward, and this is what I learned and what I will do, next time. So that's what this step 4 is really all about. Take a look, and these are the essential questions for steps 3 and 4. Oftentimes we put them together because it's really that time to think deeply about what happened and how we're going to move forward with it. Okay. So connecting standards with learning goals for PK3. So again, this is designed to be done with 3-year-olds and above. So looking at either the PK3, PTKLF, or the K3 content standards, we're only looking at K here. Then you would develop these and using the math practices. So here they are, they're the same for both PTKLF and the Common Core state standards. And I was never a math teacher, very good at it. I was English. I had a multiple subjects. I had to just renew it the other day. So I have a multiple subjects credential with the English authorization. So the vast majority of the time that I was teaching in the classroom, I was an English language development teacher at the middle school level. I taught 1 year of early childhood special education, so it was like a TK kinder class, and then 3 years of second grade in a general education space. And I was terrible at teaching in elementary school. I was a much better middle school teacher. But the math practices are the same, whether you're in PTK, LF, or the Common Core State Standard. So making sense of problems, to persevere in solving them, reason abstractly and quantitatively, constructing viable arguments, modeling with mathematics. We see a lot of that one in the early ed, using appropriate tools strategically, attend to precision, and looking for and making use of structure, and looking for and expressing regular and repeated and reasoning. And when I was looking at these, I had never really attended to these before. I had only really attended to the standards. And so this might be something new for candidates. It was something new for me, so hopefully it won't be for them. Take a look at the next slide. So these detailed, modeled learning goals will be found in the guides for candidates, and it will help to, if you would, as faculty as well, go through and model. It was an interesting thing for me that candidates really struggled with looking at learning goals and developing from a standard. Oftentimes they just thought that the goal or the whatever is written in the document is the goal for the lesson. They don't understand that it's like we have maybe 10 standards for the whole year, and we're going to just pull a little piece of it and make it very tailored to the students. So they will select a math content strand from a later foundation, and this is PKTK, right? And again, 3 and up. So it's hard for me to read because it's very tiny, but these are the documents that they would be pulling from the PTKLF that they will be adding one, taking one away, and object changes, the quantity in small group. So just making sure that we're using the right documents for the right age group, and that it includes that content strand as well as that practice. And as I was thinking about how I would teach it, I was even thinking about asking candidates to, when they write their goal, to identify clearly where the standard is, where the strand is, and where the practice is, even color coding it in some way to ensure that both parts of it are there. Because in the rubrics, as you will see, if they don't have both parts of that in that goal, it'll automatically put them down to a 2 in many, many places. And so developing these goals are going to be very important. And we do have some resources that are available, that links will be available in this presentation after we're done with the webinar today. It'll be a PDF of these in the resource folder. But we have about 3 to 5 minutes before we rejoin the rest of the group. And I'm sorry I went through that very quickly, but is there anything you'd like us to go back to, or any discussion or questions you may have? So the passing rate on the field test, I believe it was 14, right, Xavier?
That's correct.
Yeah. And we don't have an adopted passing standard for this operational version next year. The commission is going to take up that question in the June meeting, and so that will be pushed forward. And Xavier, I think out of the field test, I think all but one candidate, right?
Say that is correct, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, high 90s.
Mhm. Yeah. So, and the reason I talk about that content practice and strand standard, as well as academic language, that was a major concern and point that a lot of candidates struggled with, was having that math goal that contained both content and practice. And so in anticipation of that being a concern, um, maybe think about different ways to ensure that candidates are including those practices that help kiddos think about math and process there. We do have some dates that are going to be submission dates that are going to be available. They will be published on the website. I believe a lot of this is just hinging on this June commission meeting. And so this is a little bit early, but we wanted to try to get information out as soon as we could. But I believe that those will be published either later this month or after the June commission meeting, when the submission dates will be. Are there any other questions or comments? Anybody that participated in the field test, anything? So the question in the chat is major changes coming forward from the field test. Some of the big changes we did is just to make things more clear. We saw when I looked at the data, and Xavier, you may have some more perspective on this as well, the points of concern were understanding what a cultural and linguistic asset was, what an interest was, and then also that the academic language, what that was, and how to write a goal and execute that goal that included both content and practice. There were some candidates that misunderstood what a linguistic asset was, what a cultural asset was, and it was interesting because like I live in the Central Valley, and so it's a very different culture just being in the Central Valley versus being in the Bay Area versus being in very out in San Diego area. There's cultural aspects to being from different places. And whenever I would bring my nephews to come visit us from Southern California, they would be surprised at how many cows they would see around Merced County and being in this area. And that part is part of the culture. And understanding that culture doesn't just mean ethnicity or race, even though those are parts of them. Um, those are some things that we wanted to make sure we very clearly clarified going forward into the operational version. And yeah, going forward, the candidates who are required to complete the math cycle are going to be folks that start on or after July 1, I believe, when this is all adopted. So if you have someone that started in the spring, they are not required to complete the math cycle, but they will be participating in the literacy cycle for the RICA requirement. But and when I was coordinator for a meeting or a program, and we had an old program, mild, moderate, the mild, moderate, and then the MMSN, and then we had new program, mod severe, and then extensive support needs. So it'll just be a matter of keeping track of when they started and when they finish. So you can, and literacy is going to be cycle 2 for Cal TPA. So cycle 1 will be the MPA, cycle 2 will be the LPA. So we'll be switching the language around. Yeah. Right. So the RICA transition guides for MMSN and ESN didn't provide anything for ECSE.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Heather. Right. Are there any questions that we can answer for the good of the group before we head into talking more specifically about literacy?
We have some good questions about literacy, so I think we can hold those, but yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay, my apologies for getting cut off at the last. I never pay attention to those countdown minutes, you know how that goes. But the last question was about the transition planning for ECSE from RICA to going forward. And I did pose that forward I popped it up. So Heather is going to go ahead and take a look and see if something needs to be addressed because VI and DHH as well they did not have performance assessments until July 1, right? And so but did have RICA and ECSE, it's new to having RICA, right? Because it didn't have that before because it didn't have kinder. And so that's something that's all new and all different. So we'll hopefully get a response, if not today, going forward. So apologies for that one. Okay, so the literacy cycle overview. So in this, we're going to be talking about what to expect in each step and how the the essential questions and the evidence tables take a look. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. So in step one plan, the candidates plan and teach a literacy activity for either the group of children or including the focus child or for the focus child. So in cycle 1 and cycle 2, a candidate can be working with just a focus child or they can work with a small group as long as they have the same kind of needs. The activity plan is 3 to 5 literacy activities addressing the teaching and assessment of a selected emergent foundational reading skill and the additional theme. One of the trip ups we found in across all areas, not just early childhood, but sometimes candidates would plan just for the foundational reading skill or emergent foundational reading skill and not the additional theme, or just the additional theme and not the emergent reading skill. So it's important to make sure that the candidate plans for both. Includes integrated ELD, regardless of the group, if they contain English learners. This has to do a lot with the SB 488 and the law of teaching English language development. The authorization statement of this credential says they are able to teach English learners. So if they don't have an English learner, they still need to plan for English learners. And in English, there is no requirement for addressing English learners specifically in cycle 1. So where the candidate demonstrates competence with English learners is here in cycle 2. Each activity needs to include one ELA literacy learning goal and one ELD learning goal based on the age level of the or the strand of the students. So, and each activity needs to include the ELD, the whole, even if they're not English learners, like I was just saying. So for both cycles, there's 2 goals. And oftentimes I would tell candidates that the ELA literacy goal is the thing that we're going to do, and the ELD goal is how we're going to communicate about it. So that's it. They look a little bit more close in the ELA, ELD world, but it's what we're going to learn about and how we're going to communicate about it. An aligned language from the ELA ELD framework and other state documents, such as the California Dyslexia Guidelines, when talking about formative and summative assessments. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. So more of what to expect. Candidates select their focus child that meets one or more of the following criteria. So they could be a district identified English learner, is at risk for language and or literacy related disability, have a developmental delay, has an IEP goal in emergent pre-academic literacy skills, and they would benefit from support with making progress towards the ELA literacy strands or standards. Again here, this kiddo, the focus child, should their emphasis should be on language or literacy. So they may have a developmental delay and they have concerns and need to move forward with their language or literacy. Next slide. So when we look at the overview of step 1, the candidate, again, with guidance and support from that cooperating teacher, supervising faculty, mentors, everybody that's around this candidate that's helping them through and develop to become a teacher. The candidate needs to review recent literacy assessment, IEP information, and contextual information about the children. And it's important as far as scoring goes for candidate that they very clearly cite what recent information they are reviewing. So if it's an assessment that the cooperating teacher gave, it's some that was due to that helped to formulate their IEP goal. If it's something that the district asks kiddos to do or whatever it is, they just need to very clearly cite what recent information that they have. They need to select a focus child, and they need to describe the 3 to 5 different literacy activities, including the corresponding assessments. So how do they know what the kids know what they know, and how will the kids show that they know what they know? They need to describe those things. And there should be a language goal, and there should be an ELA literacy learning goal. So what the kids are going to learn and how they're going to communicate about it. And in this section, there's evidence to be submitted, part A, B, C, and D, like in cycle 1. There's some written narrative, contextual information, their activity plan template, up to 6 pages per activity. So it's not 6 pages total for 3 to 5 lessons that they're working on. Written narrative description of their assessments and a blank copy of the summative assessment and the rubric or performance criteria. Can take a look at their essential questions that the candidates are answering in this. How does the candidates planning leverage the children's assets, including assessments, align activities to create progression of learning, address collaboration with or facilitation of instructional support personnel, and include developmentally appropriate ELA, literacy, and ELD goals. So that's a lot of things that they're doing in that first rubric. And so it's important to kind of pull these things apart for the candidates. And because this performance assessment includes literacy and assessments and using data-driven decision-making, the rubric 2 is how does the candidate apply findings from recent assessments to plan for the selected emergent foundational reading scale using direct, systematic, and/or explicit approach. Some advice that we had from one of the coordinators who participated, he said, make sure you explain what direct, systematic, and explicit approach is, and then explain it again and again and again, so that way candidates really understand that. And oftentimes they confuse direct, systematic, and explicit with direct instruction. And so just making sure to very clearly define that for candidates is helpful. And again, making sure that they have both the foundational reading skills and an additional theme to be able to support the 3 to 5 activities that kiddos are going to do in this lesson sequence. So taking a look at step 2, this is where all the action happens, right? Video clip choice, 1 to 4 clips, up to 20 minutes. The candidate has a choice of how many videos they will submit. And video clips, there was a requirement before for them to be continuous and unedited. That requirement is no longer in place. We just ask that we don't have any elements of the video that are distracting to assessors, so we don't want music playing over what's happening. Video clips should probably be at least a good chunk of time so we can see, you don't want 3 seconds, 5 seconds, so it jumps around too much and makes it difficult to see what's happening. But video clip choice, 1 to 4 clips. Focus on the selected emergent foundational reading skills, instruction in the selected additional themes, formative assessment, adjusting instruction, and the integrated ELD. And in having scored for the pilot and looking at submissions, the strongest submissions were from candidates who truly understood what integrated ELD looked like. And so spending a significant amount of time talking with candidates about what integrated ELD looked like, just their submissions were by far the highest scoring. So, and the candidates are able to use written, verbal, or ASL commentary. So again, we talked about it briefly in the last breakout session, where it's a template, it's a page, like a Word document, and the candidate will say, at this point in the video, the child wearing the blue shirt by the window said this, and I did this, and that's so it's no longer that, putting the video clip in there, identifying and drop down menu. It's a template, and so hopefully it'll be more supportive with candidates being able to describe what's happening in the videos, because I would tell candidates, I'm like, it's not like the a television show like The Office where they turn to the camera and talk directly and explain what's happening, right? They're not going to do that in the middle of their teaching. And the reason I'm doing this is this, right? So that's their opportunity to explain why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And so in this space, right, they're going to teach and video record all activities. Another thing that I often told candidates is just let the camera roll, because you may have a plan for what you want in your lesson, your learning segment, and your activity plans for what you want to record, and you think is going to best demonstrate one skill or another, but something might happen, just extemporaneous, like just all over the place. Different things happen sometimes, different interactions, especially with adjusting instruction. You never know what kiddos are going to know, what they are going to surprise you with, what is going to happen in the classroom. And so by recording all activities, it gives the candidate more opportunities and choice as to what they will submit that is their best work, that will demonstrate their best work. They will select 1 to 4 video clips across their learning segment template, and they're going to provide commentary. So what they're doing and why. And they can either do written commentary, or they can just turn on the camera and verbally explain what they were doing and why. So there is another choice point for candidates, especially those that struggle with writing, that might be more confident in just speaking. So these are the bulk of the rubrics are in this teach and assess step. So how does the candidate provide instruction in the selected emergent foundational reading skills using a direct and explicit approach and actively engage students? That right there was also a sticking point for assessors, is what does active engagement look like? And to me, when I see active engagement, it's kiddos interacting and talking and communicating, not necessarily like, let's say they use a device, or and they're pointing at things and they're doing stuff. And so that's why I often recommended that candidates not necessarily do a worksheet in this point, because then a kiddo is just, could just be scribbling on something, and then you might have an assessor say that's not really active engagement. The kiddos aren't really doing anything. They're just maybe holding a writing implement, or maybe. So that's why it's important for the candidates to really think about how the kiddos communicate and how they engage, and how they can actively engage them in these activities. So thinking about that term active engagement is going to be important for this first rubric in step 2. Then the next one, how does the candidate provide instruction in the selected additional theme? And so that's why it's so very important to make sure the candidate has both foundational, emergent foundational reading skills, as well as that additional theme to support the students' active engagement. Because if they don't, then they would score poorly on this rubric here. The next one is, how does the candidate use assessments to monitor the children's learning and adjust instruction? And sorry, the question I often get about the adjusting instruction is looking at what's happening in front of you and attending to it consistently, and giving specific instruction to the kiddo to make sure that they're moving towards the learning target. I remember teaching 2nd grade, walking around, looking at stuff, recognizing that a student made an error, maybe adjusting with that student, then going to another and seeing the same error, stopping the class, saying, okay, everybody, I want to just make sure that we understand what we're supposed to be doing here, and maybe doing one more model or demonstration, and then letting them, kind of get back to work. That's what we're talking about when we talk about adjusting instruction. And it's oftentimes new teachers might see that as a weakness, like, I'm not doing this right and I had to change what I was doing, but it's being responsive to the students in front of you, not the students that you have an idea of in your head. And so it's important to be consistently responsive. And then the last one is, how does the candidate use assessment results to respond intentionally? So those are very, very two closely linked, related to how well they did in misconceptions and gaps in supporting their knowledge. So just how do they monitor, and how do they use those assessment results to respond intentionally? Any questions there? I know that this is a big chunk of this performance assessment. Okay. And Xavier, how are we doing on time? I think we're still pretty good, right?
Yeah, we're at 27 after we have until. Sorry, this thing's covered it up. 11:40. So
Okay,
yeah, 13 minutes.
good. Just want to make sure. Sometimes I can chitter chatter. So, what to expect in step 3, reflect. This was another place where candidates have in the past struggled in both Cal TPA and Cal APA for that matter, that reflection point, that looking back. So analyzing and reflecting on the summative assessment response for the group of children, including the focus child or for the focus child. So depending upon how the candidate set their performance assessment up, whether they work with one kiddo or a small group or the whole class. We don't typically see that in the early ed, but it's a choice point for the candidate. Um, they need to focus on understandings, gaps in knowledge, and or misconceptions that the students have, and submit focused child summative assessment response. So work from the kiddo, scored rubric, and or performance criteria. Now, oftentimes we see in the ECE world videos of kiddos because they might not have something written. It might be the kiddo is answering questions or is engaging in some kind of an activity. And so the candidate can submit a video response from a student and have a rubric that they score and provide some feedback. And the feedback to kiddos to move them forward is not just great job, kid, right? It's you really did a really nice job on, whatever it is that you were supposed to be doing. And I thought that we could tell that you worked really hard on that. Whatever it is that will be more rubric specific language that will move a student forward. It's not just praise, it's praise with, like when I'm talking to my son and he does something, he was drawing comic books the other day and I was looking, I was like, I really like how you have these comic books, just I can tell the story. I can really see the flow and how much detail you're putting into this. I can tell you're working really hard on it. And oh yeah, I am because it's my friend's birthday this weekend and I'm gonna have to go to a trampoline birthday party on a Saturday in June. But he wants to give his friend this comic book as a gift, aside from the gift that we bought that he made sure to pick out. But, by giving him that kind of feedback, it helps him to see that putting that good detail into his comic book is what we want to see. And so that's what the kind of feedback and new teachers oftentimes get confused when they see feedback. They think it's, praise or great job, kid. So another point to kind of keep in mind as you're working with these folks moving forward. Take a look at the next slide.
It's thinking.
Oh, I see a little thinky circle going on. The step 3 reflect it after engaging the children in the summative assessment, determine their progress towards meeting the ELA literacy and ELD goals. And like we said in cycle 1, if they did not make significant progress, that's okay too. For the candidate to say, you know what, I really thought this was going to be helpful or this was going to work, but you know what, it didn't, and this is why. It's okay to do that because candidates are growing, and the assumption that we talk to assessors is these folks are at the beginning of their career and they're going to be trying things and they're going to be working with kiddos, and it's okay, but they need to be accurate in their reflection. They need to look at what they did based on evidence. So based on these summative assessment results, how did the kiddos do? And based on the ELD goals, how did the kiddos develop more language? Analyze the children's results, provide families and guardians with specific actionable feedback. So This is also sometimes a challenge, especially if the candidate is a student teacher, how they would provide some of that specific actionable feedback based on these assessment results. As a parent, I always enjoy hearing about how my sons, either one of them, are doing and things that I can do to continue that forward. And I make sure to let them know, my children know that, well, your teacher said we need to be reading every day for at least 20 minutes. So guess what? We're reading for 30. So yeah, and reinforce the respect for the teacher and what they say in my home is supportive of them at school. And so understanding that teacher candidates can communicate with parents, whether it be through Parent Square or whatever it is, but just that they need to be communicating, maybe a letter home, something of that nature. They reflect on the child's progress and effectiveness of your literacy instruction, so the candidate's literacy instruction. Um, and they will be submitting that response, right? And the candidate will reflect on their progress and the effectiveness of any literacy instruction. So there will be some evidence to submit here, Part G, Part F, and Part I. We do miss a few letters in the alphabet because sometimes they're not necessarily templates in spaces. So G, H, and I. These are what we're submitting here. Written narrative, and then summative assessment. And I'm sorry, I just got a Teams message, and it always messes me up when I get Teams messages. And then I read them, and then I'm trying to pay attention. So apologies. Let's go ahead and talk about step 4. So what to expect in step 4 apply. This is going to be a plan. It's planned to support the focused child literacy development. So if the candidate planned their activity for a small group, they really need to focus on their focused child for step 4. The small group can continue to work together, but it has to be tied to that focused child's response from their assessment. So like I said, you might have a group of 2 or 3 kiddos, but this is tailored towards supporting the focused child, but it may support all students, and that's why you do a small group, or the candidate can record with just the focused child. And it's moving progress towards the ELA literacy and ELD goals that were established in the first section. So they're continuing to work towards that. And the candidate can either work towards advancing the student learning or remediating, looking back and saying, we didn't really pick up this, so maybe we need to do, and instead of an extension activity where we're expanding, maybe we need to do a reteach, and we're going to reteach. But when candidates here reteach, sometimes they think that they just need to do one of the other lessons again, and it didn't work the first time, so why would we do it again? So we want to make sure that as we reteach, we are thinking about a different way to move kiddos forward, and maybe very specifically focusing on one or two aspects of the summative assessment results. Now, there's a lot of slides in this presentation because these domains are so very specific. ECSE is different than VI, is different than DHH, and that's why we decided to kind of do breakout rooms, so that way you all weren't hearing the very specific information for VI or the very specific DHH information. And we're going to be working to break up the rooms and coordinator trainings going forward. And so sorry to some of you who are coordinators for multiple areas. You may be attending different meetings, but for some, I don't like going to a meeting where they spend half the time talking about stuff that doesn't apply to the work that I do. And so we're trying to be just more respectful of time and being able to get into more detail by having some targeted meetings. Okay. Sorry, I was thinking of where I left off. So let's see here. Yes, the reteach often focuses on targeted intervention. Extension option focuses on deepening or advancing the learning. So what the candidate will make that choice based on their assessment results, and they will explain those. There is a streamlined activity description, so it's not as detailed as they do in their learning segment template. And there is an option for written, verbal, or ASL commentary, because there is a video that the candidate takes. Now, this is another thing to just check in with candidates, because this happens a lot. They make this really great plan, they film it, and then they put it away for like 3 or 4 weeks because I'll have time during spring break to get to this. And they forget that there's a follow-up lesson. And unfortunately, as you well know, right, 3 weeks of school time is a long time. And by 3 weeks go by, kiddos are like, I don't even remember what I did I don't even remember what I did 3 weeks ago. And so it's important to work through this at a pace to be able to get to that summative assessment video. Let's go and take a look at the next slide. So step 4, where they plan their reteach or extension activity, they video record, and they provide commentary for that short video, up to 5 minutes. Next slide. The reflect and apply, just like in cycle 1, very much so go together in cycle 2. So looking at the, understanding gaps in knowledge, misconceptions, then making an instructional decision of where to go next with these kiddos and with the focus child, and how to continue moving them forward. Next slide. Okay, so that's all for us, and we just have about a minute before we go back to the main room. I'm sorry if I went through that really, really fast, but are there any questions or any slides we want to go back to?
I have a question.
Yes.
At the beginning, you talked about that there was a response that you were waiting for that you didn't have yet. I don't know if you remember, but and then you said you were sorry it wasn't with you yet. So I was wondering what you were talking about. I missed that part.
Oh, apologies. There was a question in the chat about like transition planning for ECSE programs, because there's been messaging about transitioning from RICA and TPA for mild, moderate support needs and extensive support needs, but not necessarily ECSE. And so I made sure to kick that one up. And if there needs to be something to be sent out to the community to ensure that you all have the information you need to bridge your candidates from RICA to the performance assessments and how that's going to work for ECSE. So apologies.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we have 37 seconds. Anything else?
Really quickly, so right now we have 2 different pathways for the early child spec credential. So preschool or teach up to TK kinder. So they don't take RICA, they can still teach preschool, but with the new CalTPAs, that means the preschool pathway would no longer exist, right? Because everybody has to take the the CalTPA literacy cycle anyways.
At this time, I believe so. That is.
And like, will information be sent out about that? Because right now it says there's 2 pathways still. The last correspondence that was sent out about the early.
Okay, we are going to go through the VI math cycle that will be launching this fall. And we'll go ahead and get started. So first, in step 1, plan, candidates have a math focus and they are going to plan, co-plan, or adapt a lesson that is multimodal and or multisensory and is based around UDL, and it's going to be focused around math. There's an academic language requirement that is going to be focused on developing academic language related to math. And they plan 1 lesson based around math state standards. If they're placed in preschool or TK, they can use, or they must use, the preschool transitional kindergarten learning foundations. And if they're placed in kindergarten through an adult transition program that serves students who are 22, they must use the Common Core state standards for math to plan their lesson. And in addition to this, they're going to use the math content standards for their placement along with the math practice standards. And the math practice standards are incorporated in both the PTKLF and the Common Core state standards for math. And these make sure that students are applying math concepts through meaningful activities. And these are really helpful in developing the learning goals. And you'll be able to see some detailed examples for both a preschool and TK setting and a K through adult program setting in the assessment guides. If candidates are working with a student who is a Braille user, they will also select a California Braille mathematics standard in addition to either the PTKLF strand or the Common Core state standard and the math practice standard to plan their lesson as well. And VI candidates have the option to work with only their focus student and plan the lesson around their focus student, teach it to their focus student, or they can also have additional students who require similar support in the lesson and in the videos that might need similar support to meet those math content and practice and math ALD learning goals. It's really up to the candidate and their clinical practice placement. We know that many ed specialist VI teachers are itinerant. They travel to many different sites to serve their students. They might not even have 2 students at the same site, and that's why they're able to work with a single student. But if they happen to be in a placement where they have a full class or they have multiple students, they can work with multiple students. So they also select a focus student in the math cycle, and they have choices for the focus student, and those are available on this slide. So there are a lot of choices for them. Now, the focus student does not need to meet all of these criteria. They just need to meet at least one. They could meet more than one, but they need to meet at least one of them. So the focus student might need some additional support with accessing instruction due to the impact of their sensory impairment. They might need some additional support with making progress in the expanded core curriculum or with the math content standards or the math practices. Maybe they have an IEP goal in math. They could be a Braille or pre-Braille user who needs support with the Braille mathematics standards. They might need some support with concept development or use AAC, or they use tactile or pro-tactile ASL. They might need some additional support with academic language or be an officially identified English learner, a heritage language learner, or multilingual. They might have extensive modifications in the curriculum or benefit from some support with expressive language. Or they could also be a student who has some life experience either inside or outside of school that needs some additional adaptations to support their well-being, or maybe they have some behavior in class that catches the candidate's attention. So those are the choices for the focus student. What is on the slide now is the evidence table for step 1. The evidence table is a good at-a-glance overview for what the candidate will need to do in each step and the evidence that they submit. So in step 1, plan, the candidate works with their cooperating teacher and their supervising faculty to gather and review contextual information about the caseload of students they're working with in their clinical practice. That could be through their traditional student teaching placement, or it could be through their intern or residency placement. And then they select their focus student that we just talked about on the previous slide. And after doing that, they plan, co-plan, or adapt an asset-based, multimodal, or multisensory UDL-focused math lesson. Within that lesson, they're going to integrate the areas of the expanded core curriculum that are relevant to math, and that also support the 2 learning goals that they're going to write. One of them is about math content and practice, and one of them is about math academic language. Then they're going to provide an explanation of the specific adaptations that are incorporated into that lesson for the focus student and give a rationale for those adaptations. And they're going to give some key resources or materials they're going to use for the lesson plan. And for that, they can take pictures maybe of some assistive technology they might be using, or AAC they might be using. They might take pictures of some manipulatives they're going to use, and they would turn that in. And so there's 4 pieces of evidence in step 1. They are going to submit part A, which is the contextual information, part B, which is the math lesson plan. In part B, they have the choice to use the template that is provided in the assessment materials, or they can use a locally provided format from either their program or their LEA where they are completing their clinical practice. It just needs to make sure that it contains all of the requirements that are outlined in the CalTPA and in the rubrics. In part, they also submit part C, which talks about the adaptations for the focus student, and part D, which is the evidence of the math lesson resources or materials. In step 1, there are essential questions for the rubrics. There are 4 rubrics in step 1, and this is all based around planning. So in the first rubric, the candidate is assessed on the way that they apply their findings from the recent math information that they gather to plan, co-plan, or adapt that math lesson that's multimodal or multisensory and UDL focused, that also monitors the focused student's progress. In rubric 1.2, they plan to support the focused student's learning through providing instruction in necessary prerequisite and or compensatory skills. And they also anticipate the concepts that the focused student might need some additional instruction or support in after the math lesson. In rubric 1.3, the candidate's lesson planning needs to integrate the areas of the ECSE that are relevant to math and also support the focused student in making progress toward the math content and practice learning goals and the math ALD learning goals. And in rubric 1.4, the candidate is scored on their specific adaptations for the focus student based on the focus student's assets, which might be related to visual or sensory, learning media, or cultural and or linguistic assets, and or their interests, their access and their learning needs, and their IEP goals that are related to the math lesson. Moving into step 2, teach and assess, candidates have the option to submit up to 15 minutes of video, and they can allocate that 15 minutes any way they want between 1 and 3 video clips. So they could give 1 continuous video clip, they could give 2 video clips that are cut up into 2 shorter clips that add up to 15 minutes, or they could do 3 even shorter video clips. That is up to the candidate and what best showcases their practice. Their video clips need to reflect providing access, active math learning, and providing additional instruction. When they're focusing on providing access, they're showing a clip from their lesson that shows how they integrate the ECSE that's relevant to math and provided the focus student with that instruction in the prerequisite or compensatory skills to support the focus student. For active math learning, they're selecting a clip that shows how they're actively engaging the focus student in the math lesson and also showcasing multimodal or multisensory instruction and UDL focused strategies. And when they're providing additional instruction, they're showing video that demonstrates how they address the math concepts that the focus student needs some additional support in after that initial instruction through non-visual or alternate instructional strategies. And then they also provide commentary in step 2, and commentary provides the candidate with a chance to explain what they're doing in their video and why they made those instructional choices. And they are able to do that through providing a more authentic representation of their practice. So they can explain why they did something with the student in their video. And they also have the choice here to provide either written, verbal, or ASL commentary. So they can either give a written narrative, they can film themselves talking to the camera about what they did, or they can sign if that's their preferred language. In step 2, teach and assess, they facilitate and record the entire math lesson, and then they go back and select those video clips that we just talked about that showcase their practice. And then they go back and provide the commentary. And there are some prompts in the assessment guide that will provide them with some questions to help guide their thinking. And they submit 2 pieces of evidence here. Their video clips, where they get up to that 15 minutes of video, and they can allocate that across 1 to 3 video clips. And they also submit their commentary, either written or video commentary. There are 2 rubrics in step 2. Teach and assess. Rubric 1.5 assesses the candidate on their ability to engage the focused student in a math lesson that applies that multimodal or multisensory UDL focused strategies that they planned for previously. And they're also supporting the focused student in making progress toward the math content and practice learning goals and the math ALD learning goals. In rubric 1.6, the candidate is assessed on their ability to integrate the areas of the expanded core curriculum relevant to math, and also on their ability to provide instruction in those prerequisite or compensatory skills and address the math concepts that the focused student needed that additional support in. Moving into step 3, reflect. Candidates are reflecting on the effectiveness of their adaptations that supported the focused student in making progress toward the math learning goal. Remember, the math learning goal includes both content and practice, and also on the effectiveness of their adaptations and supporting the focused student in making progress toward that academic language learning goal. In step 3, they're really engaging in that reflective process around their teaching and their planning. They're thinking about what the focused student learned and what they learned about either planning, co-planning, or adapting and teaching that math lesson. And they only submit 1 piece of evidence here. It's their written narrative, which is the reflection on what they've learned. Moving into step 4, apply. The candidate takes everything they've learned in the previous 3 steps, and they describe the future steps that they're going to take to advance their students' learning of math content and practices and math academic language development. In step 4, apply, they use steps 1, 2, and 3 to describe what they're going to do in future lessons to advance the focused students' learning. They're still going to focus on integrating the areas of the expanded core curriculum relevant to math that will support the focused students' math learning and math academic language development. In step 4, they submit part H, which is the application of what they have learned. And here they also have the choice to either write their response or record a video of their response. Step 3 and step 4 both have 1 rubric each. In step 3, rubric 1.7 assesses the candidate on their ability to reflect on the effectiveness of their asset-based multimodal or multisensory lesson. It also should be UDL focused. And what's important here is they also need to refer to evidence from the previous steps 1 and 2, in their response. So they would refer back to their planning or their teaching and what led them to that reflection on their planning or teaching. And then in step 4, apply, rubric 1.8, they're assessed on their ability to apply what they've learned to determine those future steps for learning around the ECSE and math content and practice and math academic language instruction. And again, they should have evidence to support that application of what they're doing next from steps 1, 2, and 3 in the cycle. So from either planning, their teaching, and assessment in step 2, and in step 3, reflect. So how did they come to this determination of where they're going next? What's important here in the math cycle is connecting the standards in order to write learning goals. So there is wonderful alignment between the math strands and the content standards. So from the new PTKLF that was released last year and the Common Core State Standards. So remember, if they're placed in preschool or TK, they'll select a strand from the PTKLF. And if they're in kindergarten and above, they select a content standard from the Common Core State Standards for math. And if they are working with a student who's a Braille user, they select one of those standards as well. And they use that in order to write a learning goal along with one of the math practice standards, which are the same across whatever age or grade level the candidates are working with. And then they will use that in order to write their math learning goal about content and practice. And so we do have an example here from the first grade standards. So using the standard from operations of algebraic thinking around applying properties of operations as strategies to add and subtract, and the standards for math practice around using appropriate tools strategically. The example goal is that children will further their understanding of addition and subtraction by composing and decomposing numbers up to 10 and using 2 color counters or 2 colors of connecting cubes as tools. And so that's one example of a way that you can combine a content standard and a practice standard in order to write a learning goal. And there are additional examples that will be provided in the assessment guide when those materials are released to you. We also have examples that include the Braille mathematics standards. So on the slide here, you can see that there's an example of the Braille mathematics standards, the algebra standards, and the standards for math practice, and how those are all combined together in order to write a learning goal that students will further their ability to solve linear equations and inequalities in one variable using a slate and stylus by checking their answers and using tools to support them as they explain their thinking to their peers. And so that is one example of how a candidate can combine all 3 of those standards in order to write a learning goal. We have some resources in the Google folder that will be shared with you as well that contain some math instruction resources, and that will be in the Google folder for you to access at the end of the presentation. Okay, so in the literacy cycle for VI, in step 1 plan, candidates are working to either plan, co-plan, or adapt, and they then provide instruction and support for a literacy learning segment for one focus student. And that learning segment is 3 to 5 lessons. And in those 3 to 5 lessons, they are going to teach and assess the areas of the ECC that are relevant to literacy. And that area or areas they select should support the teaching and assessment of the foundational reading skill or skills they select and the selected additional theme or themes that they select from the ELA-ELD framework. And the selected additional themes are meaning making, effective expression, language development, and/or content knowledge. Their learning segment needs to include integrated ELD regardless of if the focus student is an English learner, and that is due to Senate Bill 488 and the requirements around ELD and the legislation. Each lesson includes 1 ELA literacy learning goal and 1 ELD learning goal based on the age level strands or standards from the PTKLF or the Common Core State Standards. Each activity also includes an ELD goal, even if the focus student is not an English learner. And also these are aligned to the language in the ELA-ELD framework and other state documents, such as the California Dyslexia Guidelines, which were required to be incorporated based on Senate Bill 488. Candidates select a focus student, and again, lots of choices, just like in the math cycle. They must select a student who meets 1 or more of the criteria. So they can pick a student who requires some additional support with accessing instruction and literacy due to the impact of their disability, who needs additional support with the ECC relevant to literacy or with making progress toward meeting the ELA literacy standards. They can select a student who is a pre-Braille user or a Braille user and needs additional support with the Braille reading standards, who has additional disabilities, who has an IEP goal in foundational reading skills or another area related to literacy, who needs some additional support with concept development, uses AAC or uses tactile or pro-tactile ASL, or a student who is an English learner, a heritage language user, or is multilingual. And this could be a student who is at any EL, LPAC, or alternate LPAC level if they're not exempt from testing. So taking a look at our evidence table for step 1 plan, they're again working with their cooperating teacher or their supervising faculty to take a look at recent results from comprehensive assessment, literacy assessments, IEP information, and any other contextual information that's really helpful about their students. They select one focus student and they describe their learning segment, their 3 to 5 literacy lessons. And that will include their formative and summative assessments, their areas of the expanded core curriculum that relate to literacy, that will support their foundational reading skills they're planning for, and those additional themes from the ELA-ELD framework they're planning for. And each lesson includes an ELA literacy learning goal and an ELD learning goal. In step 1, they submit their contextual information, their learning segment template, which includes the 3 to 5 lessons, and they submit their description of their assessments, and they submit a copy of their summative assessment, or a description if it's not something that the student is completing, and they also submit their rubric or their performance criteria that they will use to score that assessment. Step 1 has 2 rubrics. The first rubric assesses the candidate's planning around the focus student's assets. Those could be visual or learning media assets, and they are also their ability to include assessments, align their lessons in order to progress the student's learning, and their ability to integrate the ECC to support the focus students' literacy development in the developmentally appropriate ELA literacy and ELD goals. Rubric 2.2 assesses the candidate's ability to apply what they found from the recent assessments that they looked at, so comprehensive assessment and those other assessments, to provide the student with meaningful access to foundational reading skills using a direct, systematic, and explicit approach to support the focus students' literacy and language development. And also, how does the candidate apply those findings again to then plan for those selected additional themes from the ELA-ELD framework and use integrated ELD to support that focus students' literacy and language development. In step 2, teach and assess, they then film themselves implementing that learning segment, that series of lessons. So actually putting those into practice, and they go back and they select their video clips, and they can allocate their 20 minutes of video across 1 to 4 clips. And that's up to them and how they want to best showcase their practice. And they're going to focus on, in their video clips, the ECC and selected foundational reading skills, instruction in the ECC and the additional themes, formative assessment, adjusting instruction, and integrated ELD. Again, they will submit commentary just like in the math cycle, and they have the choice to either provide that in written, verbal, or ASL format. And they'll explain what the choices they made were about their instruction and why they made those choices. In step 2, here's our evidence table, and they teach and video record all lessons and assessments, and then go back to select those video clips afterwards. And then they'll provide their commentary. And there's guided questions for the candidates to respond to help with their commentary responses. In step 2, they submit 2 pieces of evidence, their video clips and their commentary. There are 4 rubrics in step 2. Rubric 2.3 is looking at the candidate's ability to teach foundational reading skills alongside the expanded core curriculum using a direct and explicit approach. Rubric 2.4 looks at the candidate's ability to teach the expanded core curriculum alongside the additional themes from the ELA-ELD framework and use integrated ELD. Rubric 2.5 is assessing a candidate's ability to use assessments, literacy assessments, to monitor learning and adjust instruction to monitor the way the student is progressing toward meeting those learning goals and the integration of the ECC relevant to literacy. Rubric 2.6 is assessing the way the candidate uses the results from those literacy assessments, either formative or summative, to provide specific actionable feedback to the focus student about what they did well, or maybe some misconceptions they might have, to support their literacy and language development and ensure that appropriate integration of the ECSE. In step 3, reflect, the candidate is analyzing and reflecting on the summative assessment response from the focus student. They're focusing on what the student is able to understand or their gaps in knowledge or misconceptions. And they actually submit the focus student summative assessment response and that rubric or performance criteria that they use to score, along with the feedback they also provide. They have choices about the way they submit the assessment response. So they can use a video, they can use an audio file, or they can scan in written work. It just depends on the format they decide to use. In step 3, reflect, they engage the student in that summative assessment and determine their progress toward meeting the ELA literacy and ELD goals. They're going to analyze the results and provide the student with actionable feedback on the assessment. They reflect on the focus student's progress and the effectiveness of their instruction. And then they're actually submitting in this part 3 pieces of evidence, their focus student summative assessment response, along with the rubric or performance criteria that was scored, their focus student summative assessment actionable feedback, and they have choices about video or audio file or scanned document, and then their actual written narrative of the reflection and analysis of the summative assessment results. In step 4, apply, they are going to plan a follow-up activity to support the focus students' development related to their learning goals. And they have choices here to either look at a reteach or an extension for the focus student based on what they've learned in the previous 3 steps. There's a streamlined activity description here. And again, they have an option for written, verbal, or ASL commentary. So they're actually going to plan that follow-up activity in step 4, and they're going to ensure that this supports that focus students' literacy and language development and that integration of the ECSE relevant to literacy. And then they actually implement that activity and video record it. And they'll go back and select one video clip and then provide commentary for that clip. There are 3 pieces of evidence submitted in step 4: their description of their follow-up activity, their video clip of the follow-up activity, and then the commentary that they provide for the video. We have 2 rubrics. We have 1 rubric in step 3. The candidate is assessed on their ability to use the assessment results to provide that's not the apologize. That is not the correct essential question for 2.7. I will get that updated for you. In 2.7, they're assessed on their ability to reflect on their instructional practice and provide actionable feedback to a member of the educational team. So I will make sure that's updated in our slide presentation. I apologize for that. And in step 4, there's 1 rubric, and that is the correct essential question. And that's, how does the candidate apply the analysis of the assessment results in order to plan and give an explanation for and actually teach that follow-up activity? And they should be referring to evidence to support that from steps 1, 2, and/or 3. And we'll go ahead and return back to the main room.